Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales. Chapter 54-43. Liang Xiao felt a headache coming on. He had left the green crystal ball for last. Otherwise, when he transformed into a dragon, the whole place would be red, and he wouldn't be able to fight at all. And he specifically observed the situation of the green crystal ball. After entering the third stage, the effect of the green crystal ball was to weaken the attack. As long as they entered a certain range of the green crystal ball, the dragon warrior who accepted the test could only exert 1/10 of the attack power. This also meant that if they were too close to the green crystal ball, their attacks would not be able to shatter the crystal ball in one go, and they would have to launch several attacks. And in such a complicated situation, if they couldn't shatter the crystal ball in one shot, it would be meaningless. Because even if it was only one attack, it was a fleeting opportunity. How could they have the chance to attack several times? In other words, they had to stay away from the green crystal ball. Such an obstacle was still acceptable. Everyone only needed to pay attention to avoid the green crystal ball while chasing the crystal ball of their own color. This was still relatively simple, so it was quite appropriate to leave the green crystal ball for last. The hourglass continued to move, and before they knew it, 1/3 of the time had passed. And everyone finally shattered the next 200 crystal balls. Kang Xinmu had shattered more than 100 black crystal balls in total. Now the speed at which he shattered the crystal balls had slowed down, but he was still a little faster than the others. The space door created by the black crystal balls would disappear after a period of time, so at this stage, the difficulty had not been raised to the maximum. In such a chaotic situation, Kang Xinmu's brain had no space. All his attention was focused on observing the situation in the field. There were hundreds of crystal balls left in the field, and he almost had to observe the state of each crystal ball, remember the activation time of each crystal ball's array, and distinguish the effect after the array was activated. This was a great test of memory. Fortunately, at the peak of the Dragon Emperor, the Dragon Warrior's observation and memory had been greatly improved. The power from the royal bloodline allowed them to deal with the current situation. However, being able to observe was one thing, and being able to do it without making a mistake was another. Everyone had to be very careful to not make any mistakes. There were even a few times when the people in the field almost shattered the crystal balls of other colors, causing mistakes. Fortunately, they were always vigilant and stopped at the last moment. After a total of 600 crystal balls were shattered, the test finally entered the fourth stage. All the crystal ball spirit designs were strengthened once again. For example, the space door created by Kang Xinmu's black crystal ball was twice as large and could exist for twice as long. Furthermore, the distance the crystal ball could travel when it came into contact with the space door was also twice as long. As for the white crystal ball, the interval between flashes had been reduced by half. Previously, it would take 10 breaths of time to flash once, but now, it would flicker in 5 breaths of time. Wait a minute, the 8 colored crystal balls all had 8 different effects. Moreover, when the effect of the array was doubled, the difficulty was more than doubled. The bodies of the 6 divine dragons shuttled through the entire palace. Moya continued to pursue the white crystal ball with her ethereal figure. As long as I shatter all the crystal balls that belong to me, the difficulty should decrease a little, Kang Xinmu thought. He quickly searched for the black crystal balls and continued to shatter them. The number of black crystal balls continued to decrease one after another. However, the rate of decrease was clearly much slower. This was because there were too many other crystal balls interfering with Kang Xinmu. When the white crystal ball suddenly flashed over, Kang Xinmu had to stop. When the green crystal ball approached, Kang Xinmu had to change his position. When the target suddenly flew behind a layer of void barrier, Kang Xinmu also had to change his position before he could attack the target. The situation was very complicated, but everyone maintained their best condition and continued to reduce the number of crystal balls in the field. There are still 4 black crystal balls left. 3. 2. The last one. With Kang Xinmu's efforts, he finally shattered the last black crystal ball with the power of the Hui Dragon explosion. According to his plan, after there were no more black crystal balls in the field, there would no longer be space doors created. The difficulty for the others would decrease a little. However, he soon discovered a despairing discovery. When all the black crystal balls were shattered, space doors began to appear randomly in the field. There were always 24 space doors in the entire palace. They would suddenly appear and then disappear. No matter when they appeared, where they appeared, or when they disappeared, there was no trace of them. This was even more difficult than before. Oh no! I shouldn't have shattered all the crystal balls of the same color. Moya, leave one of your white crystal balls. As for everyone else, leave one each. Kang Xinmu immediately reminded everyone. He didn't expect this test to be so insidious. The black crystal balls had a relatively big influence on everyone. Now that he had shattered all of them, the effect of the black crystal balls would appear randomly. The scene became even more chaotic. Therefore, the others couldn't shatter all the crystal balls that they were responsible for. At least leave one. That would be much easier. Kang Xinmu could only stay at his original position and observe the situation. If anything happened, he could remind them. But in fact, everyone knew very well what they should do and what they couldn't do. Therefore, Kang Xinmu didn't need to remind them. He just needed to observe if there were any new changes in the field. After all, when the others were chasing after their own crystal balls, they might not notice the new changes in some places far away. Everyone was working hard. Only Liang Xiao was slacking at the side. He was also very anxious. He was waiting for the others to shatter all the crystal balls of their respective colors. But when Kang Xinmu shattered all the black crystal balls, he found that he couldn't do that. In other words, according to this situation, there would still be many crystal balls of other colors left in the field at the final stage. Who knew how the test would change in the final stage? Soon, they would find out. Apart from Kang Xinmu, Moya had already shattered all the white crystal balls that she was responsible for. Then, she stopped. The others had also reduced the number of crystal balls of their respective colors to 10 to 20. There were 125 green crystal balls left in the field. This was Liang Zhao's responsibility. Chapter 54-44. The final stage of the test had finally arrived. Jiang Shenwu, Moya, and Liang Xiao watched with bated breaths as they waited to observe the changes in the battlefield. In next to no time, the changes in the battlefield caught them off guard, and all of their expressions became colorful. The remaining 200 crystal balls actually began to change at this final stage. The originally fixed color crystal balls had become color-changing balls. This was too unexpected. Originally, everyone had been discussing leaving the last green crystal ball for Liang Xiao. No one had expected the crystal balls to change color in the final stage. Furthermore, everyone quickly discovered that the remaining crystal balls changed color in a regular pattern. The remaining 125 green crystal balls took up more than half of the remaining 200 crystal balls. Therefore, the remaining crystal balls were green most of the time. There was a short period of time when it was red, a short period of time when it was blue, and then purple, yellow, and orange. These 5 colors. As for the black crystal balls, it seemed that since Kang Xinmu had already shattered all of them, the remaining crystal balls would no longer turn black. However, because there was only one white crystal ball left, every 200 breaths of time, each crystal ball would turn white for 1 breath of time. Everyone discovered that the crystal ball's color changes took 200 breaths as a cycle. Within 200 breaths, 125 of them would be green, 13 would be blue, 15 would be purple, and so on. The number of crystal balls of that color that were left in the field corresponded to the number of breaths that the crystal balls would remain in that color. The rule seemed very simple, but there wasn't much time left for everyone to operate. Because the difficulty of the third and fourth stage had increased greatly, it took more time for everyone to shatter their respective crystal balls. Therefore, they only had a quarter of the time left in the final stage. With only a quarter of the time left, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to shatter the last 200 crystal balls under such complicated circumstances. Liang Xiao was truly dumbfounded. Originally, he had thought that a bunch of green crystal balls would be left for him. Then, he would happily look at them and shatter them. He could even unleash a large-scale burst of dragon blood to directly wipe out the entire field. But now, he was completely dumbfounded. This crystal ball could change color. Wasn't this too much of a bully? Bullying him, the Divine Emperor Blood Explosion Dragon's inheritance essence blood, making him see a sea of red? Could he still play? How about this? Kang Xinmu immediately became serious and suggested, because there are no more black crystal balls here, the color of these crystal balls will not change to black. I don't need to attack anymore. Therefore, I will guide Liang Xiao in attacking. The rest of you, do your best. When those crystal balls turn into the color you're responsible for, shatter them. Be fast. Also, Moya, leave behind a white crystal ball. Right now, each crystal ball will only turn white for one breath's time. If you're not confident, you can stop. In any case, the crystal ball will turn white very quickly. Let the others hit it, just the same. This arrangement could be said to be the most extreme arrangement. However, this was also the purpose of this test. No matter how strong an individual was, as long as there was a weakness in the team, such as Liang Xiao, this test was very likely to fail. However, it was not impossible. For example, Kang Xinmu's arrangement could maximize Liang Xiao's usefulness. After all, although the remaining crystal balls would change color, they would remain green more than half of the time. Kang Xinmu only needed to remind Liang Xiao which crystal ball would change color immediately. Even if he couldn't distinguish the color, he could still do it. After Kang Xinmu made this decision, everyone continued. The crystal balls began to change color. Every time they changed color, the corresponding color of the formation would be released. For example, if it changed from green to blue, it would release a void barrier at the current position. And most importantly, at this final stage, the formation released by the crystal balls would actually exist forever. In other words, the void barrier would appear and would not disappear. It would forever be an obstacle for them to shatter the crystal balls. The most uncomfortable thing was the white crystal ball. Once the crystal ball turned white, the crystal ball would disappear and flash to another location. And the white color would only exist for one breath of time. After that, it would change to another color. As for what color it would change to, it was completely random. There were no rules to follow. Kang Xinmu also discovered that sometimes the white would change to blue, sometimes to purple, and sometimes to green. He couldn't predict the rules of the change in advance. This brought a new level of difficulty for everyone to shatter the crystal balls. The difficulty of this final stage was several times higher than the previous stage. Everyone didn't even dare to blink. Moya had already used her absolute perception of space. She had truly reached the limits of the Emperor stage. She could even sense the different void powers in the entire field. She sensed carefully and could actually tell where the white crystal ball would flash to in advance. One had to know that most of the formations released by the crystal balls in the dojo were of the space attribute. However, she could actually distinguish the minute differences and directly predict where the crystal ball would flash to after it turned white. After many attempts, she was able to accurately grasp it. Finally, she began to move. In the middle of the field, a blue crystal ball suddenly turned white, then flickered and disappeared. And at the spot where it would appear, Wuxia was already waiting for it. She launched an attack in advance, and a beam of light accurately bombarded the crystal ball. It was only at this moment that the crystal ball turned white. However, Wuxia was actually able to seize this momentary opportunity. If it had been Kang Xinmu, he might have been able to do it, but the difficulty was obvious. Even Kang Xinmu didn't dare to try it rashly. There was no doubt that the green crystal balls were the most common during the color change phase. Therefore, Kang Xinmu was more inclined to instruct Liang Xiao to attack the green crystal ball. The second crystal ball in front of you on the left has just turned green. You can attack it now. All right. Liang Xiao agreed and immediately transformed into the Divine Emperor Blood Explosion Dragon. The blood-red divine dragon body swept towards the green crystal ball and exploded with the power of a blood explosion. To attack the green crystal ball, one had to be more than 10,000 feet away. Otherwise, one would enter the range where the attack would be weakened. This was the effect of the strengthened green crystal ball. However, it wasn't too difficult for Liang Xiao to attack from 10,000 feet away. It was just that before his attack landed on the target's head, it was possible that it would come into contact with other crystal balls. Of course, the probability of this was extremely low. After all, his blood explosion attack was extremely fast, and he could hit his target in the blink of an eye. Chapter 54-45. In the final stage of the test, everyone was still doing what they were supposed to do in an orderly manner. Kang Xinmu was very efficient in guiding Liang Xiao. The others were not slow either. Ran, Xiao Bai, Gu Xinyue. They were each in charge of a crystal ball of a certain color. When a nearby crystal ball changed to the color they were in charge of, they would quickly shatter it. The number of crystal balls in the field was decreasing at an extremely fast speed. However, as the number of crystal balls decreased, the difficulty of shattering the crystal balls also increased rapidly. This was because they found that when the number of crystal balls of a certain color was reduced to a certain amount, the entire palace would have the effect of many crystal balls of that color. For example, the black crystal ball that Kang Xinmu was in charge of. Now, there were always 20 space doors that changed their positions, many green domains that weakened their power, and many blue void barriers that blocked their attacks. The obstacles were increasing. The whole scene was becoming more and more complicated, and the situation was becoming more and more urgent. In the center of the palace, the hourglass above the golden box was moving mercilessly. There was only 1/10 of the time left. There were more than 30 crystal balls left in the field. But now, there were obstacles in almost every part of the field. Almost everyone was surrounded by all kinds of obstacles. The difficulty of shattering those crystal balls that kept changing colors was already tens of thousands of times more difficult than it was at the beginning. However, even in such a complicated situation, there was still one person who was as relaxed as she was at the beginning. That was Wuxia. Wuxia's precise control of her power had reached the acme of perfection. She could sense where the white crystal balls appeared, and she could also accurately bypass all the obstacles. Now that she was familiar with it, she could even easily predict the color change of some crystal balls. The color change of the crystal balls did not follow any pattern. But when it changed, her power would also change, and it would cause all the obstacles in the surroundings to change at the same time. This was a special pattern. It did not change according to the crystal ball itself, but according to the surrounding environment. Kang Xinmu paid attention to Wuxia's actions, and he had some understanding of the pattern of the crystal ball's changes. He used his strongest perception to sense all the complicated obstacles and scenes in the field. Soon, he made a judgment on the remaining 30 crystal balls. The trajectory of each crystal ball was almost imprinted in Kang Xinmu's mind. Because he did not need to be responsible for shattering the crystal balls, his thoughts were much clearer than the others, and he could analyze the situation in the field better. Soon, he continued to guide Liang Xiao. The second crystal ball on your left will turn green in 3 breaths. Attack it then. Since there wasn't much time left, he had to make every second count. He couldn't afford to waste any time. In 3 breaths of time, he could shatter another crystal ball. Therefore, Jiang Shenwu reminded Liang Xiao in advance so that Liang Xiao could prepare in advance and shatter the next crystal ball faster. After hearing Kong Shinmu to them, Liang Xiao, Kong Shinmu and Liang Xiao did not hesitate to use the 9 heavens heavenly dragon to prepare. After hearing Jiang Shenwu's words, he didn't hesitate and immediately condensed the 9 heavenly dragon blood explosion. After 3 breaths, he directly attacked the second crystal ball on his left. His movements were very fast, and his attack was very accurate. He directly bombarded the crystal ball. Just as the blood arrow formed by the 9 heavens heavenly dragon blood explosion fell, the crystal ball changed from purple to green, and was shattered by Liang Xiao. All of this was done in one go. It was almost the limit of what could be done within the rules. Unless it was the one who had set the rules, no one could do better than this. Kong Shinmu observed the pattern of the crystal ball's changes. The crystal ball's color would change according to its surroundings. If there was already a green attack weakening zone around it, or a blue void barrier around it, then it would not change color in this area. Therefore, there were all sorts of obstacles around the crystal ball, except for the green attack weakening zone. Therefore, if the crystal ball changed color in that area, it would definitely turn green. All of this existed in the details, but with Kong Shinmu's perception, he was able to determine it. Although he had been inspired by Emoya, there was no doubt that Emoya herself was not very clear about this. She only had some guesses. Kong Shinmu was a bystander with a clear view of the situation. He was the most free person among the 8 people present. Of course, he had the mind to observe the pattern of the crystal ball's flight and changes. After successfully shattering a crystal ball, Kong Shinmu was even more certain of his judgment. There were more than 20 crystal balls left, and the hourglasses were about to run out. This was a test of their teamwork and individual abilities. Everyone exerted their own strength to the fullest. 25. 20. 15. In the end, there were only 10 crystal balls left. According to the hourglasses, there were only 10 breaths of time left. This was an extremely huge test for everyone. Everyone's expressions became extremely nervous. However, Emoya and the others didn't have the time to observe the hourglass. All they knew was that more and more obstacles had appeared. The formations activated by the crystal balls wouldn't disappear in the final stages. Once it appeared, it would exist forever. Therefore, almost every inch of space in the field was filled with these crystal balls' activation array. They were either blocking attacks or space doors. All sorts of obstacles were blocking their attacks. Gu Xinyue, attack the crystal ball in front of you in 3 breaths of time. Half of the field is filled with green crystal balls. Liang Xiao, you must shatter a crystal ball every 2 breaths of time. There was no doubt that Liang Xiao was under the most pressure. Even his divine dragon body was trembling a little. However, surrounded by dragon blood, he was a little excited. This was the time to show off. Although everything he was doing now was listening to Kong Shinmu's instructions, this was also the role he could play. As long as he did what Kong Shinmu wanted him to do, he would not be a burden to the team. According to Kong Shinmu's instructions, he quickly used the dragon blood meteor explosion. 3 blood-red beams of light from the dragon blood meteor explosion shot out at the same time towards the 3 crystal balls. As there were only 10 crystal balls left in the field and they were scattered all over the palace, he did not need to dodge the other crystal balls. He only needed to dodge the void obstacles in the field. Although there were void obstacles everywhere, Liang Zhao's spatial perception was not bad. As long as there was a spatial energy, he would direct the beams of light from the dragon blood meteor explosion to go around it and sweep towards the target crystal ball. Chapter 54-46. Blood-red light flashed across the entire area. Under his precise control, Liang Xiao's most powerful attack bypassed several void barriers and weakening domains along the way. Finally, it landed on the 3 crystal balls that were flying at high speed. With one attack, he shattered 3 crystal balls that had turned green. At the same time, Amoya and Gu Xinyue each shattered a crystal ball. Ran Ran, Xiao Bai, and Yi Yin were about to shatter a crystal ball as well. There were only 2 crystal balls left. However, there were only 5 breaths of time left. The last 2 crystal balls were still changing colors. At this moment, the entire area was filled with obstacles. Every crystal ball of different colors had left at least hundreds of obstacles in the area, filling up the entire space of the palace. Even flying was a little difficult for them. The last 5 breaths of time were very little. Of the 2 crystal balls, one was blue and the other was green. However, the green one was about to turn white. Moya had already made preparations. Once again, she had predicted where the white crystal ball would flash to. Attack! A condensed stream of nature energy flew towards a certain spot in the space in a seemingly gentle manner. It was as if the white crystal ball had naturally flashed over and collided with Moya's attack, shattering in an instant. The last blue crystal ball probably wouldn't change color until the very end. As the number of crystal balls decreased, Kang Xinmu's predictions about the state of each crystal ball became more accurate. Of course, he hadn't made any mistakes up until now. Otherwise, Liang Xiao would have made a mistake long ago. The blue crystal ball flew rapidly across the entire palace. It constantly created void barriers to block the attacks of others. Gu Xinyue was in charge of attacking the blue crystal ball. At the last moment, she finally took the risk and traveled through the void in the palace. She had also cultivated the power of the starry sky inheritance. Her understanding of the void attribute void force wasn't much weaker than Kang Xinmu's. However, every space in this palace was filled with void barriers and all sorts of obstacles. Even traveling through the void might not be able to catch up to the crystal ball, however, it was clear that he had to do this now. The nightmare dragon that Gu Xinyue had transformed into traversed the void. In the next moment, she appeared in front of the crystal ball. Then, she gathered the power of the divine dragon's blood essence and swept it towards the crystal ball. The crystal ball, which was filled with the power of the void, shattered with a loud sound. Gu Xinyue's attack seemed to have been launched from countless cracks. The surroundings were filled with void barriers, energy-devouring black holes, spatial doors, and so on. Once she touched those areas, her attack would be completely nullified. But in the end, she still did it. When she shattered the last crystal ball, the void force in the area immediately dissipated. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The entire palace was restored to its emptiness. We did it. This test from Emperor Nvua's inheritance, the first test in the central region, was perfectly resolved by them. It could be said that the difficulty of this test was extremely high, but the most important thing was to test the team. If there was any disagreement in the team, they would definitely fail this test. Of course, everyone's efforts were indispensable. When the last crystal ball was shattered, Gu Xinyue, Ran, and the others finally removed their divine dragon forms. They quickly flew to Kang Xinmu's side and gathered near the golden box in the center. The hourglass was fixed at the last moment. We were only faster by a breath's time. That was too dangerous. Kang Xinmu heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, there was no mistake. Next, it was time to reap the rewards. He wondered what the final reward for such a difficult test would be. Under everyone's gaze, a void formation appeared on the cover of the golden box. As the power of the void formation was activated, everyone sensed that something was being transported out of the golden box. Our aura of Emperor Enviwa has increased 3 layers. Kang Shinmu soon discovered the change. He had the devouring power and could devour Emperor Enviwa's aura. He was very sensitive to Emperor Enviwa's aura, so he immediately sensed the change. This meant that their aura of Emperor Enviwa had reached level 13. Apart from that, they seemed to have obtained something else. It was not a material thing, but a kind of void power. This kind of void power condensed into a kind of mark that appeared on the back of each of their hands. This is the inheritance chip. Looking at the mark on the back of their hands, they could not help but feel surprised. Unexpectedly, the reward after the test in the central region of the relic was not a material thing, but a kind of void power, which was turned into the inheritance chip. The inheritance chip came from the 2 consciousnesses in Kang Shinmu's body. The ancestor demon god's consciousness was very clear about this situation. This is the inheritance chip. After you pass the test, each of you will get a chip according to your performance. When your aura of Emperor Enviwa accumulates to a certain level, the chip exchange will be activated. This relic of Emperor Enviwa's inheritance is well done. It's very formal. If you want to get the inheritance of Emperor Enviwa, you have to accumulate enough chips. Can I devour these chips? Kang Shinmu had some doubts. If he could devour them, he could gather everyone's inheritance chips to exchange for more precious things, or even the entire inheritance of Emperor Enviwa. Let's see how many inheritance chips everyone has got first. Kang Shinmu was not in a hurry. He first discussed with the others. The chip mark of Emperor Enviwa's inheritance was on the back of everyone's hand. It was a pattern of a human body with a snake tail. Every inheritance chip would produce a small leaf around the pattern to indicate the number. Kang Shinmu got 125 chips. Gu Xinyue got 129 chips. Moya got 138 chips. Ran got 128 chips. Kang Shinmu found it. Wasn't the number of chips the number of crystal balls each of them had broken? Kang Shinmu had broken his black crystal ball in the 3rd stage, so he got 125 chips in total. However, the others had eaten more crystal balls that had changed color in the last stage. Therefore, the number of chips increased. Let me have a try. Devour. Devour the aura of Emperor Enviwa first. Kang Shinmu was almost cheating with the power of devouring. He first devoured the aura of Emperor Enviwa from the others. Each of the 8 of them had more than 13 levels of aura of Emperor Enviwa, which added up to more than 100 levels. More than 100 levels of aura of Emperor Enviwa were concentrated on Kang Shinmu alone. Then, a wave of void force enveloped Kang Shinmu, and a quaint black steel appeared in front of Kang Shinmu. On the steel, some rewards that could be exchanged with inheritance chips were engraved. I'm at the level of 100 levels of aura of Emperor Enviwa now. There are not many things that can be exchanged. Anyway, I haven't seen anything related to inheritance. Kang Shinmu was a little disappointed. Chapter 54-47. The rewards given by Emperor Wa's inheritance were divided into several grades. The lowest grade was some ordinary cultivation resources. However, even though it was considered ordinary, it was actually quite rare in the outside world. For example, elemental essence that could be used in the dragon monarch's cultivation, or the essence of heaven and earth that could allow one to have a deeper comprehension of martial techniques. These cultivation resources were rare in the outside world. Even if they appeared, they were very expensive, and ordinary cultivators could not afford them. But in this place, these were only the lowest level of rewards. Kang Shinmu was a little jealous. These are the lowest grade cultivation resources, the essence of heaven and earth and the elemental essence. I only need 10 inheritance chips to exchange for 1. As for the essence of heaven and earth and the elemental essence here, if I absorb the power of one of them, I'm afraid it will be enough to upgrade the Holy Spirit Dragon martial skills. For example, Jiang Shenwu's 9th stage Extreme Dao Horn Dragon Explosion was cultivated to the Saint tier. Then, after absorbing one of the darkness-attributed heaven and earth essences, the Dark Essence Yuan, he would probably be able to reach the Extreme Saint tier. This was quite a terrifying effect. For a dragon martial artist at the level of Dragon Emperor, it was an excellent way to increase his combat power. This was especially so for a genius like Yi Yin, who practiced many different types of dragon martial techniques. This kind of thing was like adding wings to a tiger. After all, no matter how talented he was, he could not divide all his energy into all the dragon martial skills. There were a lot of dragon martial skills that he had cultivated, and most of them had reached the heaven tier, or even the supreme saint tier. But many of them should have absorbed the essence of heaven and earth like the dark essence. These essence of heaven and earth are of a much higher quality than the ones I absorbed before. Yi Yin looked at the list of essences on the list enviously. In this test, he had obtained 127 points, so he had obtained 127 inheritance chips. This meant that if he exchanged all the essence of heaven and earth and the elemental essence, he could even upgrade several dragon martial skills to the supreme saint tier. These essence of heaven and earth and the elemental essence contained endless power of heaven and earth. Absorbing the energy within could strengthen a dragon martial artist's ability to sense the power of heaven and earth, and from there, increase the comprehension of the corresponding attribute of the dragon martial technique. Of course, the prerequisite was that the attribute of the absorbed energy must correspond to the attribute of the dragon martial technique. Otherwise, it wouldn't be effective. Yi Yin was very envious of this kind of material, but the others had their own ideas, and their needs were different. Moya didn't really need anything. Her actual cultivation base was already much higher than the Dragon Emperor's. It could be said that even if she needed anything, it wasn't because she wanted to increase her cultivation base. Instead, she was improving the battle weapon she was using. For example, Kang Shinmu's astral divine weapon was the transcendent Great Starfall Blade. This astral divine weapon was the strongest weapon that could display the power of the astral inheritance. The Starfall Blade could also use Dazzle, which could produce many mysterious effects and surprise attacks in battle. Therefore, the only thing that Moya was concerned about was the brilliant material. This was also the only thing that she needed that would appear in this heritage ruin. At the supreme level, the cultivation resources she needed were naturally much more than others. However, there were many types of resources that couldn't appear in this heritage ruin. After all, this was only a heritage ruin of the Dragon Emperor's pinnacle. No matter how difficult it was, there wouldn't be rewards that exceeded the examinee's needs. 10 inheritance chips can be exchanged for 1 essence of heaven and earth, an attribute essence. Similarly, 10 inheritance chips can be exchanged for some cultivation resources that contain the spirit energy of heaven and earth. For example, this golden fleeceflower root, ancient vine lotus, thousand cloud spirit jade. They are all spirit energy resources. On the other hand, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth could allow cultivators to rapidly increase their cultivation. However, the 10 inheritance chips here could be exchanged for top-grade spirit energy resources. 1 golden fleeceflower root was equivalent to at least 3 years of cultivation for a dragon martial artist at the Dragon Emperor stage. An ancient vine lotus and 1,000 cloud spirit jade contain the spirit energy of heaven and earth equivalent to at least several years of cultivation for a dragon martial artist at the Dragon Emperor stage. However, apart from Kang Shinmu's devouring power, no one could absorb the power of such spirit energy resources in a short period of time. It would take a long time to digest all of it. Such spirit energy resources weren't of much use to people at the pinnacle of the Dragon Emperor. After all, they had already reached the pinnacle of the Dragon Emperor. Once they broke through to the Super Shenron, such cultivation resources would be useless. By then, not only would they need the spirit energy of heaven and earth, but they would also need a massive amount of dragon mark energy. The dragon mark energy was much more difficult to obtain than the spirit energy of heaven and earth. Even with the spirit energy of heaven and earth, it wasn't easy for a dragon martial artist to improve rapidly. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many dragon martial artists who wanted to cultivate at the Dragon Soul Holy Tower. The dragon mark energy there was too rich. It was a pity that the Dragon Soul Holy Tower wasn't a place that ordinary people could go. Kang Xinmu wanted to go to the Dragon Soul Holy Tower after he reached the supreme level to see if he could become a dragon martial artist. However, he was still a long way from that. 10 inheritance chips can be exchanged for rewards of a certain level. The rewards of this level are some ordinary cultivation resources that can save us time for cultivation or practicing martial arts. However, it won't be of much use to improve our strength in the long run. There are also 100 inheritance chips that can be exchanged for rewards, including the dazzling materials that we are most concerned about. Not only Kang Xinmu and the others were concerned about dazzling materials, but even a supreme expert like Moya would also pay attention to them. Many ancient dazzling materials had long been extinct in the outside world. Only in these extremely ancient ruins would there be all kinds of ancient dazzling materials. There are too many types of dazzling materials in the Emperor Wa's inheritance ruins, right? After seeing this column, Kang Xinmu and the surrounding people were all stunned. There were at least 100 types of dazzling materials for them to choose from. Of course, the remaining amount of each type of dazzling materials was indicated. There were only 3 left at most. In other words, there were a total of 300 dazzling materials in this inheritance ruins. All of these required inheritance chips to exchange for. There were some extremely rare dazzling materials among them. Originally, Kang Xinmu thought that each of them would have more than 100 inheritance chips after passing this test, which seemed quite a lot. But now, it seemed like it wasn't enough at all. Chapter 54-48. There was only one name on the list of materials that Emperor Wa's inheritance had given. It did not explain what the materials were used for. This was what troubled Kang Xinmu the most. Just by looking at these materials, he felt that they were very strong, very powerful, but he had no idea what effects they had. How should he choose? We must think of a way to get all these materials. Kang Xinmu said with certainty. What should we do? Liang Xiao was dumbfounded. There are more than 300 sets of materials. I'm afraid that we will need more than 30,000 inheritance chips in total. Each of us has only obtained more than 100 pieces in this test. It will take too long to gather 30,000 pieces. Gu Xinhue squinted her eyes and said optimistically, let's think of it this way. We have obtained a total of 1,000 inheritance chips in this test. Won't it work if we do it another 30 times? Even if we do it once every 7 days, it will only take a little more than half a year to obtain more than 300 sets of extremely rare materials. Others will never get such an opportunity. Moya smiled gently at the side, that's right. Unfortunately, we cannot guarantee that we will pass every test. Moreover, there might be others who will enter the central part of the relic after half a year. Everyone felt vexed at the thought of this. After all, there were some cultivators outside who had already obtained 5 or even 6 levels of Emperor Wa's aura. Another 4 or 5 levels and they would enter the central part of the relic to participate in the test. By then, they would have the pressure to compete. Besides, just as Moya had said, they couldn't guarantee that they would be able to pass every test successfully. Once they failed the test, not only would they not get any rewards, but their aura would also be deducted. If the aura of Emperor Wa was too low, they would probably be expelled from the central part of the relic. At that time, the chips they had would lose their effectiveness. In any case, let's pick a few materials first. Liang Zhao's eyes were still red with envy. However, he did not make a decision on his own. After all, he knew that all the inheritance chips should be used to exchange for the same thing. In the end, it would be decided what items would be distributed to each person. Therefore, he did not specify how these inheritance chips should be used. He only made a suggestion. He felt that he should first exchange for the glorious transformation materials. Only then would he be able to obtain the true benefits. Let's take a look first. There are still 1,000 legacy chips worth of rewards below. Kang Xinmu continued to look at the bottom of the list, and soon, his eyes turned solemn. Look, the 1,000 inheritance chips worth of rewards, and they're all heaven and earth sage grade. There were actually more than 10 types of heaven and earth saint grade treasures in this inheritance relic, and 3 levels of it only cost 1,000 inheritance chips. 4 layers would require 2,000, and so on and so forth. Every additional layer of heaven and earth saint grade treasure would require twice the amount of inheritance chips. For example, Kang Xinmu had previously obtained a blood rose fan from the evil prince of the demon god race. This blood rose fan was a sacred item with 3 layers of engravings. If all 3 layers of the crimson rose fan were to be unlocked, it could completely crush any existence at the level of the Dragon Emperor. Of course, it only had the power for 1 attack. It was impossible to use it in a regular battle, so it could only be used as a trump card. That was how powerful heaven and earth sage grade treasures were. In Emperor Hua's inheritance relic, the most that could be exchanged for was a sacred item with 8 layers of engravings, which would require a total of 32,000 inheritance chips. Also, we made a mistake just now. Some of the materials that we want to exchange for are worth more than 100 inheritance chips. Look at the bottom of the list, what you see are the cheapest ones. The average price of dazzling materials is 200 inheritance chips, and there are even extremely rare dazzling materials that require 1,000 inheritance chips. For example, this Dark Night God's feather requires 1,000 inheritance chips to exchange for it. Kang Xinmu said straightforwardly, if we want to exchange for all the materials, we have to stay in this relic for at least 2 years, and we have to pass the inheritance test every 7 days. Also, we have to have a 50% success rate in passing the test. To exchange for all the materials, they would need at least 50,000 inheritance chips. This was naturally not cheap, but if it was a sacred item with 8 layers of engravings, it would also be enough to make people's eyes go red. Therefore, the more inheritance chips, the better. Right now, they only had 1,000 inheritance chips, and that was after a lot of hard work. There was still a long way to go. In other words, we have to be prepared for a long battle here. Moya grinned and said, I don't mind. What about you guys? Does anyone want to go out in advance? Let's not talk about long-term for now. Kang Xinmu suddenly said, I just tried it, and I can directly devour the inheritance chips from Liang Xiao. In other words, I can devour the inheritance chips of others. Can we think of some way to get others to collect the inheritance chips for us? Just like when he devoured Emperor Hua's aura outside the relic. Of course, it was easy to deal with Emperor Hua's aura at that time. Kang Xinmu could directly devour the aura of others. However, the inheritance chips were different. When others obtained the inheritance chips, they would most likely use them to exchange for what they needed. Kang Xinmu, you just mentioned that the Night God's feather of the Dark World can be exchanged for at most 1,000 inheritance chips, right? Liang Xiao suddenly asked, what kind of brilliant material is this? It's so powerful? Since he asked, Kang Xinmu explained, it is indeed an ancient brilliant material. In the ancient times, there was an ancient god called the Night God of the Dark World. He was a very powerful bird god. Later, he died, and his feathers were attached with divine power, which can be used to transform battle weapons. The effect of the Night God of the Dark World's feather is to attach the battle weapon with the divine power of the Night God of the Dark World, which can greatly enhance our concealment ability, even more than 10 times. This was what the ancient demonic ancestor had told him. The night god of the dark world could be said to be the opponent of the ancient demonic ancestor. He was wild and unruly, and was later killed by many ancient gods. The night god of the dark world's feather left behind was naturally extremely precious. That thing could transform battle weapons, and it could enhance the concealment ability of the battle weapon. It was especially suitable for Kong Shinmu's dragon soldier Chen Xing. When all of the dragon soldier Chen Xing's battle runes were transformed into concealment runes, Kong Shinmu's concealment ability was already very strong. The current him could already hide from the senses of at least a transcendent god level 6 expert when he activated concealment with all his might. Even some experts at the peak of the transcendent god level 7 to level 9 would not be able to discover Kong Shinmu's traces if their senses weren't top-notch. If he obtained the brilliance of the night god of the dark world's feather, it could be said that Kong Shinmu's concealment ability would instantly increase by more than 10 times. At that time, even ordinary supreme experts would not be able to discover his traces. Unfortunately, this brilliant material required 1,000 inheritance chips, which was impossible for Kong Shinmu and the others to take out to exchange for this brilliant material. Chapter 54-49. No matter what, Jiang Shenwu felt that he was lacking too much of a bargaining chip for the inheritance. As long as he had enough inheritance chips, his strength would be greatly improved. For Kong Shinmu and the other 8 people, the cultivation resources exchanged for 10 inheritance chips were not very useful. After all, each of them was at the peak of the Emperor realm. When they finished exploring the inheritance ruins, they would choose to break through to the level of Super Divine Dragon. However, the items that could be exchanged for 100 inheritance chips were extremely useful. The crux of the matter now was how to obtain enough inheritance chips. If we rely on ourselves, I'm afraid it will take a long time, even years, to exchange for the things here. Kong Shinmu had a headache. I have a suggestion. Moya suddenly smiled softly and said, Kong Shinmu, you can swallow Emperor Nvua's aura and inheritance chips and attach them to others. In this case, why not cooperate with the dragon gods? Although many of the dragon warriors who came to explore this inheritance ruins are rogue cultivators, there are also many people from the dragon gods' legion. The people from the dragon gods' legion should be able to cooperate with us. You help them get the aura of Emperor Nvua so that they can enter the central part of the inheritance ruins. Then, they will share a part of the inheritance chips they get with you. In this way, you can get the inheritance chips faster. This was a good idea. If it was a dragon martial artist or a rogue cultivator, Jiang Shenwu did not believe that they would obediently hand over the inheritance chips. Those people were all wily old foxes. If he helped them, they might even hinder him in the future. But the people from the Dragon God's Legion were different. To be able to join the Dragon God's Legion, the most important thing was to listen to orders. They would do whatever the higher-ups arranged. Anyway, they only needed to do what the higher-ups arranged, and they would naturally get their own internal rewards from the Dragon God's Legion. For them, the inheritance chips and so on were handed over to the higher-ups anyway. In this case, why not cooperate with the people from the Dragon God's Legion? We have to find a member of the Dragon God's Legion first, and then let him pass the message, Moya said with a smile. As for leaving the inheritance ruins, there is no need. The people of the Dragon God Clan Legion can all be trusted. Then I'll leave it to you. Kong Shinmu nodded. Kong Shinmu, you helped them devour Empress Nvua's aura so that they could come in. How much inheritance do you want from them? Moya asked again. This had to be negotiated first. This was the key issue of interests. If the negotiation failed, then there was no need to talk about the cooperation. Personally, I think it's more appropriate to collect 10% of the inheritance chips. Oh, no, Liang Xiao said after some thought. At first, it was because he felt that since they were all on the same side, if he accepted too many, it would create a bad impression on the dragon gods. But soon, he felt that if it weren't for Kong Shinmu, it would have taken them a long time to enter the central part of the ruins. If they had entered the central part of the ruins at that time, there was no telling how many inheritance chips Kong Shinmu and the others would have obtained and how many items they could exchange for. At that time, cultivators from other races would also be able to enter the central region of the ruins, and the competition would be intense. So, now that they had entered first, it meant that they had gained something. 20%, it shouldn't be too much, right? Liang Xiao asked cautiously. It's okay. If Kong Shinmu has no objection, I will negotiate with 20%, Moya said with a smile. In this case, the Dragon God Legion is still very easy to negotiate with. I even think, even if it's 30%, they will reluctantly agree, but there should be a certain time limit. It doesn't matter. The higher the ratio, the better. The time limit is half a year or even a year. Kong Shinmu said with a smile, or until cultivators from other races enter the central part of the ruins. Moya said, okay. You go ahead first, and I will come back to this palace after negotiating with them. Yi Yin said with a smile, then I will be your contact person. I will wait in this palace and digest the gains from the battle just now. Yi Yin had gained a lot from the battle just now. Because he had cultivated too many kinds of dragon martial techniques, after a fierce battle, he had gained something from each kind of dragon martial technique. As for Kong Shinmu and the others, there was no need for them to stay here. After all, it might take several days for Moya to find someone to talk with. During this time, Kong Shinmu and the others would probably be able to continue with the next test. Anyway, there were only 8 of them in the central region of the ruins now. So they didn't have to worry about any danger when they separated. At most, they would encounter the test of the inheritance relic. Although these tests might be dangerous, the danger was not very great. At most, if they failed, the aura of Emperor Enviwa would be deducted. Then, everyone split up and took action. Moya went to contact the people from the Dragon God Legion, while Yi Yin digested the gains and further improved his strength. Kong Shinmu continued to move forward with the other 5 people. Of course, they would not go too far. They just wandered around nearby to see if there were any other tests in the palace next door. 3 days passed quickly. During this period, Kong Shinmu and the other 5 people had experienced another test. This test had a very high requirement for combat strength. They had to fight against another Emperor Enviwa demon statue. However, this Emperor Enviwa demon statue was completely different from the previous one. Its fighting style and activating formation were completely different. Fortunately, Kong Shinmu and the other 5 people were already familiar with their cooperation. They had a good understanding of each other's means. Their cooperation was also seamless, and they successfully defeated the Emperor Enviwa demon statue. In the end, each of them got dozens to more than 100 inheritance chips according to their combat scores. Kong Shinmu had the most, getting 152 inheritance chips. The others got 70 to 120 inheritance chips. In total, they got another 600 to 700 inheritance chips. But it was too tiring. After every test, each of them almost overdrew all their strength, and it was very demanding on their spirit. If they had such a test every day, they would definitely be unable to hold on soon. So if they wanted to get more inheritance chips in a short time, they still had to rely on others. Finally, Moya returned, and she brought back good news. The Dragon God Legion agrees to cooperate. In 4 days, the quota for next month will be opened. The Dragon God Legion will send 50 Dragon Emperor peak experts from the Dragon God Legion to enter this relic. Kong Shinmu, your task is to help these 50 Dragon God Legion devour enough aura of Emperor Enviwa. And after they enter the central part of the relic, half of the inheritance chips they get will be given to you. According to your suggestion, this division will continue until cultivators from other races enter this relic. 30%. Chapter 54-50. In other words, if each of the 50 warriors of the Dragon God clan obtained 100 inheritance chips, the total harvest would be 5,000, and Jiang Shenwu would get 1,500. This was already a very high share. After all, Kang Xinmu could get so many inheritance chips just by sitting still. Of course, the premise was that Kang Xinmu could help the 50 experts of the Dragon God clan to devour 10 layers of aura of Emperor Enviwa. That was 500 layers in total. This was not a small number for Kang Xinmu. Of course, with the cooperation of the experts of the Dragon God clan, it would be easier for Kang Xinmu to find the cultivators of the Fu Shui clan and the Thousand-Winged Snake clan in the Inheritance Relic. Currently, within the Heritage Ruins, each race would have 60 people entering every month, but the number of people leaving every month was less than 10. Therefore, there were at least hundreds of cultivators of the Fu Shui clan and the Thousand-Winged Snake clan. These cultivators were the targets that Kang Xinmu was going to hunt. For Kang Xinmu, it was not too troublesome to hunt these opponents. The trouble was that when he killed more of them, they would notice. It was the same as in the extraterrestrial battlefield in the macro world of the Dragon God clan. 500 layers of aura of Emperor Enviwa was not a small number. Kang Xinmu might need a month to do it. Of course, this also extended the time that the cultivators of other clans could enter the central part of the relic. For Kang Xinmu, it could also bring him a lot of benefits. Next, Kang Xinmu and the others divided into two groups. Kang Xinmu went alone to pick up the 50 cultivators of the Dragon God clan. There were 60 people in this batch. 50 of them were from the Dragon God clan, and the other 10 were individual cultivators of the Dragon Warriors. They could explore the Inheritance Relic by themselves. Kang Xinmu only needed to be responsible for the 50 cultivators of the Dragon God clan. In this way, the storm that swept the entire Inheritance Relic of Emperor Enviwa began. For the upper echelons of the Dragon God clan, it was great news that Kang Xinmu could devour the aura of Empress Enviwa. This meant that even if the entire Heritage Relic was nominally shared by the 5 major races, in reality, all the good stuff would be taken by the Dragon Gods. At that time, when the 50 Dragon Martialists entered the central region of the Legacy Remnant, they would definitely be able to make the first move and sweep through the central region, obtaining a massive amount of inheritance chips and taking the lead in exchanging for all the good things that were worth exchanging. On the other hand, Kang Xinmu also had a stable harvest of inheritance chips. To him, this was the fastest way. I need the inheritance chips. Even if it's just 10 inheritance chips, the essence of the world is still useful to me. If I want to unlock the seal of the small starry sky world, I'll need this essence. This relic of Emperor Enviwa's inheritance was simply tailor-made for Kang Xinmu. Furthermore, this was only the harvest from the middle of the ruins. As for what kind of harvest there would be in the core of the ruins, that was something even more exciting. However, there was one thing that Kang Xinmu needed to pay attention to. That was, the target of the Dragon God's army was the few sacred items of heaven and earth. Therefore, even if Kang Xinmu had enough inheritance chips, he could not choose to exchange for sacred items of heaven and earth. This did not matter. After all, Kang Xinmu did not even have the resources to unlock the seal of his own small starry sky world. Giving him more sacred items of heaven and earth would be useless. As for these sacred items of heaven and earth, they were the resources of the entire Dragon Gods and could enhance the overall strength of the entire Dragon Gods. Although there was only one sacred item of heaven and earth with 8 layers of seal, it was only 1 layer less than what Emperor Shi had obtained previously. It would still be of great use in the supreme level. No matter what, the next few months would undoubtedly be the time for Kang Xinmu to reap great rewards. Swoosh! Li Xian deactivated his divine dragon form and landed on the peak of the mountain. Behind him, a huge corpse of a demonic beast rolled down the cliff. An emperor-level demonic beast is no longer difficult, Li Xian sighed. Wang Yue, Yun Yiru, and Yuni Yue quickly appeared by his side. Then, the other members of the Devouring Dragon League, a total of more than 60 people, stood on the cliff under Shengguan Dai's lead. Big brother Jiang hasn't been back for a long time. Li Xian looked up at the sky, somewhat missing the person who had rescued him from his predicament. Let's cultivate well and not let big brother Jiang down. Yuni Yue smiled faintly. She was the one with the highest compatibility with the divine dragon blood essence in the entire Devouring Dragon League. Now, she was also the strongest in the entire Devouring Dragon League apart from Shengguan Dai. After all, Shengguan Dai was originally a tutor at Donghuang Yangwu College. She had long been a Dragon Emperor-level powerhouse. Now that she was here to help lead the Devouring Dragon League, she was undoubtedly the strongest. However, Yuni Yue's talent was also extremely high. In a short time, she had already grown to the second level of the Divine Dragon's inheritance. As for her cultivation, she had also reached the Samsara realm. Back then, it had taken Kang Xinmu more than 2 years to reach this level. Of course, this was also because the Devouring Dragon League's current cultivation resources were simply too abundant. The Devouring Dragon League's cultivation resources were all prepared for them by Kang Xinmu. The Dragon Mark's energy essence and natural treasures were all brought back from the Dragon God's great world. Naturally, they could improve faster than others. These resources would only have such an effect if spent on them. If they were given to someone who was not very talented, even if their cultivation could improve so quickly, they would not be able to fully control their increased strength. Their battle strength would definitely not be as strong as it was now. In the Martial Dragon continent, the Devouring Dragon League was practically the strongest existence. Even Yuni Yue, who had just broken through to the Samsara realm and obtained the Dragon Emperor's blood essence, was practically unrivaled in the entire Martial Dragon continent. Therefore, they began to miss Kang Xinmu. In the Martial Dragon continent, they had almost reached the pinnacle. Although their cultivation and the Divine Dragon's blood essence had not reached the pinnacle of the Martial Dragon continent, there were already no opponents with comparable strength for them to train. I'll ask the Dean. If she agrees, we can go to the Dragon God's great world in advance to train. Shengguan Dai also felt that it was about time. Even she had already reached the pinnacle of the Dragon Emperor's cultivation. It was time to go to the next level. When Kang Xinmu returned, who knew how long they would have to wait? She could ask Yu Yaji directly. As long as Yu Yaji agreed, the Devouring Dragon League could go to the Dragon God's great world. However, once we leave the Martial Dragon continent, it will not be easy to come back. The formation that connects the two worlds consumes a lot of resources every time it is activated, Shengguan Dai continued. This also gave everyone a reminder. Although they longed to go to the Dragon God's great world and see a wider world, once they left, it would not be so easy to come back. At least with their own strength, it would not be so easy to prepare the resources to activate the formation that connects the two worlds. Let's go back and say goodbye to our families first. After a discussion, everyone decided to make preparations first. Chapter 54-51. At this time, the members of the Devouring Dragon Group naturally did not know that Kang Xinmu was leading a team to explore a permanent intermediate relic. It was an extremely dangerous place for ordinary dragon warriors. Those who could step into it were at most at the peak of the Dragon Emperor realm. Once they surpassed that level, they would not be able to step into it. Although they were all at the peak of the Dragon Emperor realm, most of the dragon martial artists could not guarantee that their strength was the strongest. Even if they were extremely strong in a head-on fight, they might be ambushed by others, therefore, it was extremely dangerous. Of course, on the contrary, the rewards were also extremely bountiful. But it did not include the inheritance of Emperor Enviwa. In the periphery of the inheritance of Emperor Enviwa, everyone could only accumulate Emperor Enviwa's aura. Only when they reached the central part of the relic could they get the inheritance chips to exchange for the cultivation resources they needed. Without the appearance of Kong Shinmu, perhaps the 5 races would start to explore the central part of the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa in 1 or 2 years. But now, it was brought forward. When Kong Shinmu entered the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa, half a year had passed. During this half a year, he had been participating in the tests in the central part of the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa non-stop. He had been constantly obtaining inheritance chips. There were all kinds of tests in the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa. Kong Shinmu had participated in more than 20 tests until now, and none of them were repeated. Just by relying on himself, he had already obtained more than 2,500 inheritance chips. As for Yin, Amoya, and the others, they each had about 2,000 inheritance chips. At present, they had not exchanged for these inheritance chips, because they could not use those cultivation resources for the time being. They had to make preparations for breaking through to the Super Dragon realm. All in all, they had more than 10,000 chips. And every time they passed the test of the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa, they would have 3 levels of Emperor Nviwa's aura. Of course, they had failed some tests during these days, and the aura of Emperor Nviwa would be deducted. At this moment, each of them had 60 or 70 levels of Emperor Nviwa's aura. However, there was still a long way to go to the inner part of the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa's aura. According to the estimation of the demon god ancestor, they should have 100 levels of Emperor Nviwa's aura to go to the core area of the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa's aura. And this was only a part of Kong Shinmu's harvest. Before Jiang Shenwu returned to explore the central region of the relic, he had helped 50 dragon martial artists devour the aura of Emperor Nviwa. Each dragon martial artist was at level 10, and he had helped them enter the central region of the relic. In this way, the entire central part of Emperor Nviwa's inheritance of Emperor Nviwa was under the control of the Dragon God clan. They encountered a lot of trouble in collecting and devouring Emperor Nviwa's aura. When they absorbed the aura of Emperor Nviwa aura, they felt time. Unfortunately, in this ruin, no one was a match for Jiang Shenwu. Here, if it was a duel, Jiang Shenwu could do whatever he wanted. Dragon Emperor Nviwa battle sh mu was Dragon King Warrior a Dragon's Phone Ling T. In the end, the cultivators of the Talisman Water clan and the Thousand-Winged Snake clan no longer dared to stay in the ruins, and all of them left. In the end, the quota of 60 people every month was not enough for both clans. Because they would be killed by Kong Shinmu's team if they came in. In the end, Jiang Shenwu and the others didn't manage to collect and devour all 500 layers of Emperor Nviwa's aura. It was the military headquarters of the Dragon God clan that negotiated with the Demon God clan and the Ancient Phoenix clan and exchanged some resources with them. After all, they were allied races. They couldn't kill them directly, so they could only use resources to exchange for Emperor Nviwa's aura. In this way, it took a month for the 50 dragon warriors to enter the central part of Emperor Nviwa's inheritance. The Demon God clan and the Ancient Phoenix clan didn't feel so conflicted. Now they had no other choice. They could only give Emperor Nviwa's inheritance to others. Who asked the Dragon God clan to have such a genius like Kong Shinmu? At this point, the name of Kong Shinmu spread among the major races again. This person was too shameless. How could he occupy Emperor Nviwa's inheritance like this? It made people jealous. But the others couldn't do anything about it. Kong Shinmu and his team hid in the central part of the inheritance. Even if they let the supreme experts take action, they couldn't do anything to Kong Shinmu. They could only watch Kong Shinmu's continuous gains. In just half a year. Not only had Jiang Shenwu passed more than 20 trials of the ruins and obtained more than 2,500 inheritance chips, but he had also obtained nearly 8,000 inheritance chips from the army's dragon martialist. This was a huge number. It meant that in half a year, each of the dragon warriors had passed at least 10 tests. Although the dragon warriors of the army were all top experts, and their cooperation with each other was also top-notch. But compared with Kang Xinmu's team, their overall strength was still a little worse. They couldn't complete the tests with a high probability, so their efficiency was not very good. However, even so, the dragon warriors of the army had already exchanged for the few sacred items of heaven and earth. This time, the Dragon God clan had a big harvest. The Fu Shui clan and the Thousand-Winged Snake clan were defeated. And the Demon God clan and the Ancient Phoenix clan, although they didn't make a big profit, they made a small profit. Their people later specially provided Emperor Nvua's aura outside to exchange for the cultivation resources they needed with the Dragon God clan. In this way, they all benefited from each other. Only the Fu Shui clan and the Thousand-Winged Snake clan were almost driven to death by Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu could imagine how much the leaders of these two clans hated him now. He was afraid that they would send people to assassinate him as soon as he got out. When I get out of this inheritance, I have to be careful. Maybe someone will come to assassinate me, not only because Kang Xinmu was a great threat, but also because he had monopolized so many resources. He must have many precious and rare cultivation resources. If they killed him, they would get back what they lost in the inheritance of Emperor Nvuo. With so many inheritance chips, we can almost start exchanging for the harvest. When Kang Xinmu's personal inheritance chips finally reached 2,500, he finally gathered everyone and prepared to welcome the harvest. Most importantly, besides them, cultivators from other clans had finally stepped into the central region of the inheritance. Some experts from the Demon God clan and the Ancient Phoenix clan had finally collected all 10 layers of Emperor Nvuo's aura and entered the central region. This also meant that it was time for Kang Xinmu and the others to go deeper into the inheritance. Before that, they naturally had to exchange for the rewards. The first choice for these inheritance chips was naturally those dazzling materials. These dazzling materials, each one of them in the Dragon God clan's great world, would fetch a sky-high price, hundreds of thousands of gold dragon coins, or even millions of gold dragon coins. Chapter 54-52. Just one feather of the night god of the dark world would cost 1,000 inheritance chips. Kang Xinmu felt the pinch. However, he could be said to be filthy rich now. Naturally, he would not miss out on an illuminating material that would be of great use to him. The others did the same. They began to choose the illuminating materials they needed. Everyone was preparing to break through to the Super Shenron level. They needed to prepare a Super Shenron weapon, and the illuminating materials for the Super Shenron weapon had to be prepared by themselves. Now, it was almost ready for them. With the illuminating materials they could exchange for, not to mention a few Super Shenron weapons, even if each of them wanted to forge 10 Super Shenron weapons, it would be more than enough. However, they were prepared to keep more of the illuminating materials for themselves. When they needed gold dragon coins, they could sell some of the illuminating materials and exchange them for gold dragon coins. To Gu Xinyue, this was simply a moment of great harvest. She casually chose an illuminating material to exchange for, and it would be equivalent to the annual income of the Gu family in the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice City. Now, she had more than 2,000 inheritance chips. She could exchange for more than 20 of these illuminating materials. She did not exchange all of it for the illuminating materials. Instead, she used half of it to exchange for cultivation resources. These were prepared for the other dragon practitioners in the Gu family. Her younger brother, Gu Qinglian, was one of them. With these cultivation resources, the entire Gu family would definitely rise to become a super existence. She also chose a few illuminating materials for her father. She was prepared to forge a top-notch Super Shenron weapon for him. The head of the Gu family was definitely the pillar of the Gu family. If he could become stronger, the entire Gu family would become even more indestructible. And all of this was because of Kang Xinmu. Gu Xinyue was now filled with both admiration and gratitude towards Kang Xinmu. She felt that this was all because of her luck towards this genius who had suddenly appeared in her life. Moya was not so particular, she did not need anything. All the chips that he had obtained were given to Jiang Shenwu. This made Liang Xiao, who was at the side, jealous. Sister Moya, you're so good to Shenwu. When will you be so good to me? Liang Xiao was simply envious and jealous. If you also become Emperor Shi's disciple, I can also share half with you, Moya said with a smile. Liang Xiao immediately became listless. Yi Futian wanted to be apprenticed to Emperor Shi, but unfortunately, Emperor Shi's requirements for the divine dragon were very high. Yi Futian was not an absolute genius like Kang Xinmu. Even when he broke through to the pinnacle of the Dragon Emperor, it was because of Kang Xinmu's help that he could directly break through the bottleneck. They didn't discuss for too long. No matter what kind of dazzling material it was, no matter how many inheritance chips it required, he would directly exchange for it. Things like the Dark Night God's Feather, which required 1,000 legacy chips, were rare. Most dazzling transformation materials only required 100 or 200 legacy chips. In total, there were more than 300 dazzling transformation materials. A portion of them had already been exchanged by the dragon warriors of the army. Every dazzling transformation material here was of the highest quality. Kang Xinmu and the others were not too picky. Apart from the Dark Night God's Feather that Kang Xinmu needed, the other materials were only worth 100 or 200 legacy chips. Just like that, Kang Xinmu exchanged for a Dark Night God's Feather and 10 ordinary dazzling transformation materials. These ordinary dazzling transformation materials were all of the highest quality in the outside world. They were worth hundreds of thousands of gold dragon coins. But compared to the Dark Night God's Feather, they were far inferior. Next, Kang Xinmu exchanged the rest of his inheritance chips for cultivation resources. He planned to use these cultivation resources to unlock the 4th layer of the Starry Sky Small World. That was a seal that required at least 50 million gold dragon coins to unlock. Even for Kang Xinmu, this was a great deal of pressure. The others also exchanged for about 10 dazzling transformation materials each to prepare for their super divine dragon weapons in the future. By the time everyone had finished exchanging, there were only around 200 glorious transformation materials left to be exchanged. It's still not enough to exchange for all of them. Kang Xinmu shook his head regretfully. But we are about to head to the core area of the relic. There is still a chance. I got 8,200 legacy chips from the Dragon God's army and the 2,100 legacy chips that Sister Moya gave me. I'll exchange for 50 dazzling transformation materials. These 50 dazzling transformation materials were all of the highest quality legacy chips worth about 200 legacy chips. Every dazzling transformation material could greatly increase the Dragon Warrior's combat strength when used on it. It was priceless. Kang Xinmu planned to store them first. If he had a use for them in the future, he would take them out. After all, other than Dragon Warriors, even Starry Sky divine weapons with the power of the Starry Sky inheritance could use these dazzling transformation materials. It was definitely not a loss to exchange for dazzling transformation materials. All of a sudden, almost all the dazzling transformation materials in the entire Emperor Wa's legacy relic were taken. Originally, it would take at least a few years for these materials to be exchanged. But now, there was less than 1/3 of them left. The cultivators who entered the central area of the relic later might not know that there were more than 300 dazzling transformation materials in the relic at the beginning. The legacy chips were exchanged in no time. Then, Kang Xinmu and the others left the central area of the relic and returned to the outer area. Let's find someone to exchange for the aura of Emperor Wa on them. An ordinary dazzling transformation material can be exchanged for at least 10 levels of Emperor Wa's aura. In this case, we can each use 3 dazzling transformation materials to accumulate 100 levels of Emperor Wa's aura. Kang Xinmu had already thought of the next action plan. After accumulating 100 levels of Emperor Wa's aura, they could enter the core area of the Emperor Wa's legacy relic. What was there? Currently, nobody knew. Even the ancient demonic god ancestor was not very clear about it. After all, this was only one of the relics left behind by Emperor Wa. However, Kang Xinmu was sure that if he was strong enough, he would definitely gain more from the core area than from the central area of the relic. Therefore, 3 dazzling transformation materials per person was a worthwhile investment. The key was to enter the core area earlier than others. That way, they would have a huge lead and they could monopolize some of the benefits. 10 levels of Emperor Wa's aura could be exchanged for dazzling transformation materials worth hundreds of thousands of gold dragon coins. It was quite a bargain. Chapter 54-53. The trading partners that Kang Xinmu and the others found were all rogue dragon warriors of the dragon gods, as well as cultivators of the ancient Phoenix clan and the demon god clan. In the relic, Kang Xinmu was not afraid that they would do anything bad to him. Anyway, in this relic, no one was a match for Kang Xinmu, and no team could be a match for Kang Xinmu's team. Unless dozens of people ganged up on them, they were not afraid. Even if they were surrounded, Kang Xinmu could totally hide with his team and escape. Simply put, unless the relic itself was a threat, no one could threaten Kang Xinmu's life at all. On the way to find people to trade, Kang Xinmu had already chosen to integrate the Dark World's feather into the formless weapon, the Chen Xing. The celestial dragon weapon, after transforming the feather of the night god of the Dark World, was mixed with some dark lines, which contained an unparalleled mysterious power. Jiang Shenwu tried it. When the celestial dragon weapon's battle runes were all transformed into invisible battle runes, once he hid, even Moya would not be able to find him. This was undoubtedly an extremely terrifying concealment ability. It should be noted that Moya was a supreme expert who cultivated the force of nature. In the test of breaking the crystal ball, it could be seen that her perception was the strongest among them, even stronger than that of Kang Xinmu himself. Even though in this relic, her force of nature was suppressed, it was still an extremely powerful perception. However, now she could not sense the existence of Kang Xinmu. This shocked Moya a little. She did not expect that the Dark World's feather could have such a heaven-defying effect. No wonder it was a top-notch illumination material that could only be exchanged for 1,000 inheritance chips. The Dark World's feather is a part of the Dark World's night god's body. It's hard to imagine how powerful the ancient gods were. Empress Nviwa, the ancient ancestors of the demon god, the chaotic sky-devouring dragon, and so on. All of them were unimaginably powerful existences to the current cultivators. Right now, even supreme experts were nothing in front of these ancient divine spirits. What kind of era was that? The human race, who cultivated the force of nature, was actually able to contend against such an ancient god? Kang Xinmu found it hard to imagine. As long as I enter the core area of Emperor Nviwa's inheritance, I will know clearly what kind of existence Emperor Nviwa is, Kang Xinmu thought. 7 days later. Each of them paid the price of 3 dazzling materials and exchanged for the aura of Emperor Nviwa on the 30th level with the other practitioners. As for the other practitioners, some of them didn't have any hope to enter the depths of the relic. Therefore, they would take the test in the periphery and exchange the aura of Emperor Nviwa they obtained for cultivation resources that were useful to them. All of this was because of Kang Xinmu's devouring power. Without Kang Xinmu's devouring power, the entire relic of Emperor Nviwa's inheritance would not be like this at all. Without Kang Xinmu, everyone in the relic would be very excited now, because finally, someone could enter the central area of the relic. Moreover, because the progress of the 5 clans was almost the same, there would be more intense conflicts and fights after entering the central area of the relic. the situation would become more chaotic. Unlike now, with the help of Kong Shinmu, the other clans almost gave up and didn't have a chance at all. The dragon warriors of the Divine Dragon clan had entered the central area of the relic a few months ago, obtained most of the benefits, and exchanged all the treasures of heaven and earth. All of this was thanks to Kong Shinmu. And then, Kong Shinmu and the others were going to enter the core area of the relic. This was another big lead. This is a relic of inheritance. In the core area, there are probably things related to inheritance, Moya said with a smile. Let's all work harder. Maybe someone can get the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa in there. The things before are all external objects. If we can get the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa, even I will be tempted. The inheritance of Emperor Nviwa was a kind of ability, a kind of talent inheritance. And it might be the same as the power of inheritance in the starry sky, which could allow people to have two kinds of inheritance at the same time. After all, Emperor Nviwa's level was extremely high, and it was not impossible for people to have two kinds of inheritance. Therefore, Moya was a little tempted. If there was a chance, she would definitely try to get it to enhance her strength. With her current strength, Moya had basically reached the bottleneck, and it would be extremely difficult to improve further. And the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa was a very good opportunity. Each of the 8 people, including Kong Shinmu, obtained 100 layers of the aura of Emperor Nviwa, and then returned to the central area of the relic, coming to the several dark passages they had found in the central area of the relic. They couldn't enter these passages before. But this time, each of them had 100 layers of the aura of Emperor Nviwa. They walked along the passage to the end, and what appeared in front of them was no longer a stone gate, but a stone stele. On this stone stele, several ancient characters were carved: Emperor Nviwa, Stele of Inheritance. Finally, we're in front of the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa. Kong Shinmu and the others were a little surprised. They didn't expect to see the Stele of Inheritance directly along the passage in the central area. The Stele of Inheritance is a world of its own. The 16-winged heavenly demonic god ancestor in Kong Shinmu's body said with some emotion, "Enter it, and you may get the key to the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa. Maybe you can directly get the inheritance of Emperor Nviwa. Kid, this will depend on your own luck." The stele of Emperor Nviwa's inheritance appeared. It was an independent small world. And if the ancient demonic god ancestor was right, the test should only be taken by one person. Even if they went in together, they would be completely separated. They could only take their own test. The final reward would be decided according to the result of the test. Let's adjust ourselves to the best state and get ready to enter the stele of inheritance. Be careful. Kong Shinmu reminded the others, and then activated the invisible weapon, Chen Xing. He wanted to familiarize himself with the ability of the Dark World's Feather of the Night God. I'll go first. I don't have anything to prepare. However, this legacy stele might not exist for long. All of you, pay attention. After saying that, Moya floated forward and arrived before the legacy stele. Kong Shinmu and the others were all a little nervous as they looked at her back. What on earth was inside the stele of inheritance? Would Moya encounter any danger if she went in first? But very quickly, their expressions changed. As Moya touched the hundreds of meters tall stele of inheritance, her figure in white suddenly disappeared. At the same time, the entire stele of inheritance became blurry. Chapter 54-54. No one had expected that after Moya touched Emperor Nviwa's legacy stele and disappeared, the legacy stele would disappear as well. I'll go. Liang Xiao was an impatient person. He immediately turned into a dragon and flew toward the legacy stele. Instantly, he disappeared in the afterglow of the legacy stele's power. Could it be that the legacy stele can only exist for a short period of time after being touched by someone? Gu Xinhue said worriedly. It's very likely. Kang Shinmu said in a deep voice, let's go. Since it's the legacy steel, there won't be any danger. Let's seize this opportunity. Kang Shinmu did not need Emperor Envoi's inheritance. However, since he was already here, he would be letting himself down if he did not take a look. Following that, everyone flew toward the legacy steel. Very soon, the divine dragon bodies that everyone had transformed into disappeared into the passage after coming into contact with the afterglow of the inheritance tablet. When all of them disappeared, the heritage tablet also completely disappeared from the passageway. Is this the small world of inheritance inside the legacy steel? Kang Shinmu came to a white scene. He looked around and found that the people who were together a moment ago had disappeared. He was the only one left in the void filled with white clouds. In front of his black divine dragon body, there was a huge heavenly stairway. The huge heavenly stairway was illusory. It seemed to be just a symbol. Each step was tens of thousands of zhang wide and was made up of white clouds. Kang Shinmu was now at the bottom of the heavenly stairway. When he looked up, he found that the heavenly stairway was spreading upward. The steps were connected to the clouds until they could not be seen by the naked eye. Even Kang Shinmu's perception could not penetrate the surrounding white clouds. Is this Emperor Envoi's test? Kang Shinmu did not think too much about it. He made some preparations to ensure that he was always in a fighting state. Then, he flew toward the heavenly stairway. The first step. Kang Shinmu flew up and did not feel much pressure. But soon, his vision blurred, and the surrounding white clouds surrounded him, enveloping his entire divine dragon body. Instantly, the only thing left in his field of vision and perception was the flight of steps that spanned hundreds of thousands of feet. In front of him, on the other side of the stairs, a white shadow slowly appeared. This shadow seemed to have a human body and a snake tail. It seemed to be another statue of Emperor Envoi. However, Kang Shinmu knew very well that it was not a real figure, but a figure transformed from white clouds. Are we going to fight with that phantom? Kang Shinmu thought. He maintained the body of a divine dragon, and the formless weapon, Chen Xing, was already in preparation. Hide! Kang Shinmu directly turned Chen Xing into a stealth battle rune and activated the super stealth effect of the Dark Night God's feather. In the next moment, his pitch-black divine dragon body disappeared from the scene as if he had never appeared. It was a pity that, the phantom of Emperor Envoi, which was transformed from the white clouds, completely ignored Kang Shinmu's concealment method. After all, Kang Shinmu had obtained this concealment method from the ruins. How could he deceive the opponent? In the next moment, the phantom of Emperor Envoi, which was transformed from the white clouds, suddenly burst out with an attack, sweeping towards the place where Kang Shinmu was. Devour. Kang Shinmu ignored it and directly devoured the opponent's power. After the opponent launched an attack, the phantom of the white clouds seemed to disappear immediately, as if it had only appeared to strike a blow at Kang Shinmu. This blow doesn't seem to be too strong. Not to mention me, even Liang Xiao can easily resist it. Kang Shinmu did not think too much. After he devoured the opponent's power, the phantom of the white clouds dissipated, and the surrounding steps appeared again. In front of Kang Shinmu was the second giant step. He continued to transform into a dragon and flew up the steps. As soon as he flew up, the surrounding white clouds gathered again, covering all the steps. Another phantom of Emperor Envoi, which was transformed from the white clouds, appeared in front of him. Again? This time, the phantom of Emperor Envoi launched another attack at Kang Shinmu. This attack was different from the first one. However, Kang Shinmu did not care about it and directly devoured it. Then, the phantom of Emperor Envoi disappeared again. What the hell is going on? Kang Shinmu could not figure it out. It did not look like a test at all, but more like playing house. The attack of the phantom of Emperor Envoi was not strong at all. It was not lethal at all. He could devour it easily. Since he could not figure it out, he would not think about it. The same thing happened to the third, fourth, and fifth steps. As soon as Kang Xinmu stepped on it, the surrounding white clouds turned into the phantom of Emperor Enviwa, which struck at him and then dissipated. Soon, Kang Xinmu passed the fifth step. He flew up to the sixth step. This time, when he flew up the steps, the scene around him changed abruptly. The long stairway to heaven and the vast white clouds disappeared in an instant. Shouts of killing came into Kang Xinmu's ears. Is this an illusion? In the blink of an eye, Kang Xinmu found that he seemed to have come to a battlefield. It was an extremely vast plain. On the plains, countless black dots were fighting with each other, shouting, "Kill!" He was also one of the countless black dots. Soon, he found that his body had turned into a being with a human body and a snake tail. This was the Emperor Enviwa's clan. Emperor Enviwa was not alone. She had her clansmen. Kang Xinmu tried to communicate with the ancient demon god ancestor in his body, but found that he could not. It seemed that the guy had been blocked in the stairway to heaven inheritance. In this case, Kang Xinmu had to figure out a way by himself. Now I've turned into a member of the Emperor Enviwa's clan with a human body and a snake tail. In this ancient battlefield, I have to fight against a group of demons and ghosts. The opponents of the Emperor Enviwa's clan were a group of demons and ghosts. The whole battlefield was filled with overwhelming demon qi, giving people a feeling of endless oppression. Countless members of the Emperor Enviwa's clan were charging forward. The member of the Emperor Enviwa that Kang Xinmu had turned into was at the side of the camp. I can't use my skills. Kang Xinmu found that he could not use the inheritance of the Dragon God clan and the power of the starry sky. It was obvious that his real body hadn't come to this battlefield, but his consciousness. It was a little similar to Gu Xinyue's nightmare dragon's ability, trapping him in an illusion. I can't use my skills, so I can only use the skills of the Emperor Enviwa's people? The attack on me from the fifth step was to teach me how to attack as a member of the Emperor Enviwa's people? Is this the meaning of the stairway to heaven inheritance? Kang Xinmu finally figured it out. Chapter 54-55. The phantom of Emperor Enviwa on the fifth stair was actually a demonstration for him. But now, the fifth stair and above allowed him to appear in the dreamland and come to the solemn ancient battlefield. He wanted to kill enemies as a member of Emperor Enviwa. As to what level he should reach to leave the dreamland and return to the heavenly ladder of inheritance, Kang Xinmu didn't know. No matter what, let's kill them first. Just now, the phantom of Emperor Enviwa performed 5 kinds of Emperor Enviwa's martial skills on the fifth stair. Every 5 levels of Emperor Enviwa have different effects. If I didn't pay much attention to them, I'm afraid I couldn't perform any of them at all. Fortunately, I've devoured the power of the 5 movements of Emperor Enviwa's martial skills. If Kang Xinmu's body was still here, he could directly perform the devoured martial skills of Emperor Enviwa. Even though he couldn't use his body in the dreamland, he had already devoured the 5 martial skills of Emperor Enviwa and had a superb understanding of them. Although he couldn't be familiar with them in a short time, he could perform them after getting used to them for a while. For Kang Xinmu, this test was really, extraordinarily easy. It's a pity that this inheritance test is a bit difficult for others. Kang Xinmu was a bit worried about Liang Xiao. It would be great if this guy could get the inheritance of Emperor Enviwa. Pitifully, it would be extremely difficult for him to get the inheritance under the heavenly ladder of inheritance with such a rule. Forget about the others, I have to get familiar with this body first. Kang Xinmu felt a headache. It was the first time for him to use the identity of a human body and a snake tail. He had never even dreamed about it. It was too awkward. He discovered that his body was still quite large, at least 1500 zhang tall. Disregarding everything else, just walking on his snake tail felt a little awkward. However, he quickly thought of a solution. That would be great if they could just fly. However, there was another problem. Emperor Nvua's people all flew with their tails, without wings like divine dragons. Therefore, Kang Xinmu had to get familiar with this body for a while. After familiarizing himself with this body, he began to observe his surroundings. Right now, he was on the flank of the battlefield, and his opponents were all demons and ghosts with towering devil chi. His own body's cultivation seemed to be much, much higher than his own. This was most likely a supreme level of power. If he could fully unleash it, it would naturally be extremely powerful. But now, of course, he couldn't completely familiarize himself with this body. Let's try the first move. Emperor Nvua's martial technique, Grand Beginning Virtual Blade Cut. As Kang Xinmu mobilized the power in this body, countless terrifying powers gathered around him. Naturally, when the white cloud phantom attacked him on the steps, it wasn't as strong as it was now. But now, the body that Kang Xinmu was in was a supreme existence. With just a thought, Kang Xinmu imbued it with his understanding of the absolute beginning void blade slash. It instantly exploded with unparalleled power. Countless powers that looked like white clouds surrounded his body. Then, dozens of absolute beginning void blade shadows were condensed. These absolute beginning void blades circled around his body as he flew straight towards a bull-headed demon that was only a few hundred zhang tall. This bull-headed demon didn't look very strong. Kang Xinmu thought that no matter how weak he was, he should be able to crush it. Grand Beginning Void Blade slash, go. The countless Grand Beginning Void blades around him suddenly swept out and shrouded the bull-headed demon. Roar. The ox-headed demon let out a deafening roar at this moment. His entire body charged towards the dozens of Grand Primordium Void blades. His entire body was like an iron wall as he smashed through the dozens of Grand Primordium Void blades. So fragile? Kang Xinmu couldn't believe it. After all, this body of his had supreme level of power. As for the ox-headed demon, he looked like an ordinary transcendent god. Although Kang Xinmu didn't know how the strength of these powerful beings in antiquity times was divided, he could feel that his body was definitely much stronger than that bull-headed demon. But he didn't expect that his attack would be shattered by the bull-headed demon. I have some problems understanding this. Grand Beginning Void Blade slash, Kang Xinmu was a little depressed. He had devoured the power of the absolute beginning Void Blade slash, and now he didn't understand it well enough. What could others do? Of course, he wasn't discouraged. He had only devoured the absolute beginning Void Blade slash once. Even if he was given this inheritance and Emperor Nvua's martial skill, he was afraid that he would only be able to cultivate it directly and reach the level of human level. There were still earth level, dragon level, and heaven level above that. Even if Kang Xinmu had devoured Emperor Nvua's martial skill once, it would still be difficult for him to comprehend it all at once. I'll do it again. The more he used, the more he would gain. Kang Xinmu wasn't discouraged. He didn't use any other means but pointed at the absolute beginning Void Blade slash, and continued to use it. Countless, absolute beginning Void blades, gathered, circled, and then exploded. However, they were shattered mercilessly by the bull-headed demon one after another. Unfortunately, Kang Xinmu's body was too strong. Although the bull-headed demon kept shattering his absolute beginning Void Blade slash, Kang Xinmu didn't have a chance to fight back against Kang Xinmu. As Kang Xinmu used Emperor Nvua's martial skill, again and again, Kang Xinmu became more and more proficient in this martial skill. The power of the absolute beginning Void Blade slash became more and more terrifying. Gradually, the bull-headed demon couldn't resist it anymore. Go to hell. Finally, Kang Xinmu felt that he had made a breakthrough in his comprehension. The absolute beginning Void Blade slash finally reached the earth level. The number of absolute beginning Void blades encircled him suddenly increased to over 100. In the next moment, the absolute beginning void blade slash fell and cut the bull-headed demon into two pieces. The bull-headed demon's body, which was hundreds of zhang tall, collapsed on the ground of the ancient battlefield with a loud crash. I have to continue. Kang Xinmu felt that he was in the right state. If this went on, he would soon comprehend the absolute beginning void blade slash to a higher level. Moreover, after killing the bull-headed demon, he didn't feel that he could get out of this dreamland. Therefore, Kang Xinmu had to continue. He found another target. It was 1,000 zhang tall headless horseman phantom. It was charging in the battlefield at an extremely fast speed. Several members of Emperor Nvua's family died under its sharp spear. Absolute beginning void blade slash. Chapter 54-56. Boom! Hundreds of absolute beginning void blades landed on the headless horseman phantom shadow. The headless horseman phantom shadow was thousands of zhang tall and had an extremely terrifying aura. It was surrounded by countless ghost flames like an ancient evil god, emitting a terrifying aura. The hundreds of grand primordium void blades only managed to disperse some of the ghostly flames around him. Soon, the ghostly flames started burning again. It still doesn't work. Kang Xinmu sensed that the power of his absolute beginning void blades was not strong enough. This was because Emperor Wu's martial skill had not reached the great completion level. If Emperor Wu's martial skill had reached the great completion level, the headless horseman phantom shadow would not have been able to withstand his attack. I can only continue. Kang Xinmu thought to himself. Just when he was about to perform the absolute beginning void blade again, the headless horseman phantom shadow suddenly dashed towards him. The sharp spear in its hand swept out billowing ghost flames. It was like a bolt of lightning descending on Kang Xinmu. It's coming. Absolute beginning void blade. Kang Xinmu gathered his power again, but it seemed a little weak. In the next moment, the headless horseman phantom shadow's attack landed on his body. Boom! Kang Xinmu's vision became blurry and he felt dizzy. Then, he found that he had returned to the inheritance stairway. I've been hit. I'm only a little familiar with the absolute beginning void blade. It's impossible for me to withstand the attack of the headless horseman phantom shadow. Kang Xinmu was a little depressed. Did this mean that he had failed the test? Soon, he realized that it was not. This was because he was still standing on the sixth step of the inheritance stairway. It was just that the white clouds around him had shrouded this step, preventing him from moving forward. It seemed that he had to fulfill some conditions to advance further. Could it be that I have to successfully cultivate the absolute beginning void blade? Or do I have to kill some specific demons in the ancient battlefield? Kang Xinmu was a little distressed. But no matter which one it was, he had to improve himself further. The primordial void blade cut was a rather powerful offensive martial art technique of Emperor Nvu, and it could also be used for defense. It could be said to be a combination of offense and defense. When the absolute beginning void blade revolved around his body, it was an extremely powerful defensive barrier that could withstand very strong attacks. Therefore, Kang Xinmu decided to cultivate the absolute beginning void blade to a higher realm first. When the time came, he would be able to attack and defend at the same time. Once his battle power increased, it would be easier for him to kill any demons or fulfill any other conditions. Just as Kang Xinmu was thinking about this, his vision blurred. All of a sudden, a phantom of Emperor Nvu, which was transformed by a white cloud, appeared. The phantom of Empress Nvu had a human body and a snake tail. However, her figure was hazy and could not be seen clearly. She appeared from the surrounding clouds. As soon as he appeared, he didn't hold back against Kang Xinmu. He immediately used the absolute beginning void blade slash. This was the absolute beginning void blade slash that had been cultivated to the heaven realm. Kang Xinmu was startled. He directly transformed into a black dragon. The devouring power erupted, enveloped the power of the absolute beginning void blade slash, and then quickly devoured it. I've comprehended more. Not bad. Then, the phantom of Emperor Nviwa that had appeared before appeared again. A total of 5 martial arts techniques of Emperor Nviwa were displayed to Kang Xinmu again. Choose one of the martial arts techniques of Emperor Nviwa and work hard to cultivate it until it reaches the heaven realm. In addition, kill a certain number of demons in the illusion of the ancient battlefield, and then you can pass the stairway to heaven inheritance. This time, Kang Xinmu finally heard the hint from the inheritance. It turned out that he had to choose one of the martial arts techniques of Emperor Nviwa and cultivate it to the heaven realm. In addition, he had to kill a certain number of demons in the illusion of the ancient battlefield, which was extremely difficult. It should be noted that it would take at least several months, or even several years, for a completely unfamiliar martial art technique to cultivate all the way from zero to the heaven realm, no matter how talented the cultivator was. Not to mention that this was an unfamiliar martial art technique of Emperor Nviwa, which they had never encountered before. Kang Xinmu was fine, for he could devour it. What about the others? Were they going to be tested in the stairway to heaven inheritance for several years? 1 day in the stairway to heaven inheritance is equivalent to 1 breath in the outside world. 1 year in the stairway to heaven inheritance is equivalent to 365 breaths in the outside world. Less than the time it took for an incense stick to burn. Young man, don't worry and cultivate here. The neutral voice appeared in Kang Xinmu's mind. This put Kang Xinmu at ease, but at the same time, he was a little puzzled. It seemed that there was something in the inheritance that could read his mind. It would remind him of what he was thinking, he didn't know what it was exactly. Was it the consciousness of Emperor Nviwa's inheritance or some other existence? Anyway, if Kang Xinmu wanted to pass the stairway to heaven inheritance, he had to do as it said. Undoubtedly, the martial art technique of Emperor Nviwa that he chose was the primordial void blade. In his opinion, this martial art technique of Emperor Nviwa was more powerful than the other martial arts techniques of Emperor Nviwa. It was straightforward and smooth to perform. However, even though he had decided to practice the primordial void blade, the other 4 shadows of Emperor Nviwa, which were transformed from white clouds, appeared one after another and performed the other 4 martial arts techniques of Emperor Nviwa to him. Then, he felt dizzy again, and his body changed. He appeared on the ancient battlefield again. Come on, headless horseman ghost shadow. Without hesitation, Kang Xinmu found the headless horseman ghost shadow that had killed him before. This demon was indeed powerful, but Kang Xinmu had just devoured the power of the primordial void blade, so his understanding of Emperor Nviwa's martial art technique had reached a higher level. When hundreds of primordial void blade burst out and gathered together, Kang Xinmu's understanding of Emperor Nviwa's martial art technique broke through once again. Attack! The headless horseman ghost shadow charged at him. In the face of his primordial void blade, which had broken through a small realm again, the headless horseman ghost shadow just swept the spear in his hand, and the burning ghost fire intercepted the hundreds of primordial void blades in the air. Boom, the power exploded, and the ripples spread. Again. Kang Xinmu was not to be outdone, so he attacked again. After 3 times, the headless horseman ghost shadow had already dashed in front of him. It directly flicked the spear away, and the ghost fire burst out, shrouding him and burning him to ashes. Kang Xinmu came out of the ancient battlefield again. He still failed to defeat the headless horseman ghost shadow, which was a bit powerful. But when he came out again, another white shadow of Emperor Nviwa appeared and released the 5 martial arts techniques of Emperor Nviwa at Kang Xinmu. Chapter 54-57. Kang Xinmu understood that he had countless lives to fight in the ancient battlefield. Once he died, he would return to the stairway to heaven, where the Phantom of Emperor Envihua would appear and demonstrate the 5 Emperor Envihua martial arts techniques. After the demonstration, he would return to the ancient battlefield to kill the demons again. This was a natural advantage for Kang Xinmu. He would have a better understanding of Emperor Envihua's martial arts techniques if he devoured their power. If he wanted to cultivate a martial arts technique to the heaven level, wouldn't it be several times faster than others? Every time he died, he would be able to devour it. He just needed to die a few more times. Anyway, the condition to pass the test was to cultivate one of Emperor Envihoua's martial arts techniques to the heaven level and kill a sufficient number of demons in the ancient battlefield. As for how many demons he needed to kill, Kang Xinmu had no idea. However, as long as he cultivated the absolute beginning void blade cut to the heaven level, it would not be difficult to kill a sufficient number of demons. The number of fiendish demons in the ancient battlefield was uncountable. Jiang Xinwu might not be able to kill them all even after 100 years. Therefore, Kang Xinmu was not in a hurry. He just needed to cultivate the absolute beginning void blade cut first. Then, Kang Xinmu began to cycle between the two places. Under normal circumstances, he would definitely find demons with similar strength. However, every time Kang Xinmu challenged demons, he would find powerful ones. For example, the Headless Horseman Ghost Shadow was a very powerful demon. The Ghost Fire Spear was so destructive that even Kang Xinmu's absolute beginning void blade cut could not resist it head-on. Others might choose to deal with it, but Kang Xinmu fought it head-on. If he died, he could devour the power of the 5 Emperor Envihua martial arts techniques again to improve his understanding of the 5 Emperor Envihua martial arts techniques. Simple and violent. This was the advantage that Kang Xinmu had over others. 1 day, 2 days, Kang Xinmu spent more time on the stairway to heaven inheritance. His understanding of the absolute beginning void blade slash was also in the process of constantly growing, from the human level to the earth level, then to the dragon level, and finally to the heaven level. When Kang Xinmu's absolute beginning void blade slash reached the dragon level, he finally killed the Headless Horseman. Then, he found a more powerful demon on the ancient battlefield. While comprehending Emperor Envihoua's martial arts techniques in the battle, he sought a quick death. For him, it was not slow for him to comprehend Emperor Envihoua's martial arts skills during the battle. But how could it be faster than directly devouring the power demonstrated by the white cloud shadow after he died? Therefore, Kang Xinmu continued to die in battle and devour, repeating the cycle. Even so, it took him a full 30 days to cultivate the Grand Primordium Void Blade to the Heaven grade. Heaven rank was already the pinnacle of ordinary martial skills. The difference between the Saint level and the ultimate Saint realm depended on the core comprehension of the martial arts skills. Only those with extremely high comprehension and suitable skills could achieve it. Anyway, Kang Xinmu did not want to do that. When he comprehended the Grand Primordium Void Blade slash to the Heaven grade, he became invincible on the ancient battlefield. He started to kill enemies. He wanted to break through the stairway to Heaven inheritance as soon as possible to see what the inheritance was about. Therefore, he prioritized efficiency over everything else. The demon opponents he chose were all stronger than the Headless Horseman and Ghostly Shadow, but not too much stronger. Against such opponents, he could kill them instantly with the Grand Primordium Void Blade slash. Some demons with strong defensive abilities might need to use it twice. But they could not pose any threat to Kang Xinmu. The Grand Primordium Void Blade slash could be used for both offense and defense. Now that Kang Xinmu had transformed into a member of Emperor Envihua, he could only use this move. But this move alone was enough for him to dominate the ancient battlefield. This seemed to be a supreme martial arts skill of Emperor Envihua. After comprehending the Heaven grade, his combat strength was extremely strong. Feeling his combat strength as a member of Emperor Envihua, Kang Xinmu was a little envious and eager. If he could grow into a supreme expert soon, that would be the real rise of the world. The battle of supreme experts was so refreshing that he was immersed in it. Finally, when he had killed as many as 100 demons, he returned to the stairway to heaven inheritance again, and the seventh step appeared. He could continue to move forward. Kang Xinmu spent 30 days on the stairway to heaven inheritance and completed the first stage of the test. But it was not so smooth for the others. By now, everyone had already known the rules of the stairway to heaven inheritance, but it was extremely difficult to pass the first stage of the test. Moya. Her comprehension ability was already at a very high level, but even she was much slower than Kang Xinmu in comprehending Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills here. This was the nature-defying part of the devouring power. However, Moya was different from Kang Xinmu. She did not come out to watch the demonstration, but constantly enhanced her understanding of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills in the battle. And it was not just one. It seemed that Moya was very interested in the inheritance of Emperor Nvua. She practiced 5 kinds of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills at the same time, and she could use them freely in the battle, almost improving at the same time. When the 5 kinds of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills were used together, they could produce some stronger effects and could cooperate with each other. Therefore, Moya could barely compete with demons like the Headless Knight and the Ghostly Shadow when the 5 kinds of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills were only at the human grade. Moreover, as she comprehended more and more powerful martial arts skills of Emperor Nvua, she could deal with more powerful demons. Because Kang Xinmu only studied one kind of the primordial virtual blade cut, he directly worked hard to pass the test. But Moya was different. She was experienced and knowledgeable, so she probably had her own speculation about the conditions to pass the test of this inheritance. All in all, she chose to improve her understanding of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills in the battle, and practiced 5 kinds of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills at the same time. In this way, although her progress would be much slower, the time in the inheritance stairway would be slowed down by many times. 1 day in the inheritance stairway was equivalent to 1 breath outside. Therefore, she had enough time to practice here. For her, if she wanted to practice Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills, this inheritance stairway was the most suitable place. She wanted to practice more Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills on this inheritance stairway. In her opinion, this should be able to give her more points to get the inheritance. Other people also had different ideas. Gu Xinue already had the double inheritance of the Dragon God clan and the power of the Starry Sky, so she was not particularly enthusiastic about the inheritance of Emperor Nvua. She also knew very well that it was not good to bite off more than one could chew. Now she could barely take care of the 2 kinds of inheritance of the Dragon God clan and the power of the Starry Sky, not to mention the 3rd kind of inheritance. Therefore, her idea was the same as that of Kang Xinmu, which was to choose a kind of Emperor Nvua's martial arts skills, practice them to the heaven grade, and pass the test first. As for Ran Ran, she had high requirements for herself. Chapter 54-58. The 8 people on Kang Xinmu's side made different choices. Undoubtedly, Kang Xinmu was the one who cultivated Emperor Nvua's martial skill the fastest. For Kang Xinmu, who had the devouring power, he only needed to die in battles and then come out to devour Emperor Nvua's martial skill to cultivate. This was the most convenient, but also the most painful, because he needed to experience death many times. On the ancient battlefield, every time Kang Xinmu died, he would feel excruciating pain, which was unavoidable. However, the pain of death was nothing to him. Ever since he had stepped onto the path of cultivation, the pain that Jiang Shenwu had experienced was innumerable, too much. After 30 days, Kang Xinmu passed the first test. In the next 60 days, he passed the second test. The second test was almost the same as the first one. He had to choose one of Emperor Nvua's martial skills to cultivate one of them to the heaven realm, and then kill ancient demons in the ancient battlefield. The strength of those ancient demons was getting stronger and stronger. And the Emperor Envoi's martial skill they cultivated was getting stronger and stronger. In the first test, Jiang Shenwu practiced the primordial void blade cut, a martial skill of Emperor Envoi at the Emperor realm. In the second test, they needed to cultivate the supreme level Emperor Envoi's martial skill. In the third test, they needed to cultivate the supreme level Emperor Envoi's martial skill. Of course, they could only roughly comprehend the supreme level Emperor Envoi's martial skill. In other words, they could only cultivate the simplified version of the supreme level Emperor Envoi's martial skill. In this case, they could not exert the full power of the supreme level Emperor Envoi's martial skill. However, when they reached the supreme level, it would be much easier for them to perfect this martial skill, which would save them a lot of time. Of course, the current difficulty of cultivation was already extremely high. But for Kang Xinmu, he could cultivate faster with the devouring power. In 1 month, he successfully cultivated the Taichu virtual blade cut. In 2 months, he had successfully cultivated another supreme divine level martial technique of Emperor Envoi. Then, it took Kang Xinmu half a year to successfully cultivate the simplified version of Emperor Envoi's supreme martial skill. In this way, almost 1 year had passed. However, as it was in the test space of Emperor Envoi's inheritance, only less than 30 minutes had passed in the outside world. After passing the 3 tests, the next step was purely climbing the stairway to heaven. With every step he took, Kang Xinmu would be transported to the primordial battlefield. Thereafter, he would have to kill different primordial fiendish demons for each step. The ancient fiendish demons he had to kill were getting stronger and stronger. Their numbers were also increasing. Where did these ancient fiendish demons in the ancient battlefield come from? These are all illusions created by Emperor Envoi. Even if they are illusions, they should have their original forms. This means that these demons did indeed exist in ancient times. The more Kang Xinmu thought about it, the more frightened he became. Any one of these primordial fiendish demons was extremely powerful. Even a supreme divine level fiendish demon was much more powerful than all the supreme divine level dragon martial artists that Kang Xinmu had seen so far. They were all existences with great innate talents. It was not that the current dragon martial artists and the cultivators of other races were too weak, but these primordial fiendish demons did have some special talents. The tests along the way had given Kang Xinmu a lot of understanding of the primordial fiendish demons. Although this understanding was not very deep, it was at least a certain level of understanding. In the past, he did not know the situation in the primordial era at all. But now, after experiencing the illusions of the primordial battlefield, he more or less understood that period. Just like that, he walked up the stairway to heaven step by step. With every step he took, he had to kill several primordial fiendish demons in the primordial battlefield. The 50th step, the 100th step. After reaching the 100th step, Kang Xinmu realized that it had become rather difficult for him to move forward with the Emperor Wa's martial techniques that he had cultivated. Fortunately, the Supreme Emperor Wa's martial techniques that he had chosen were of the defensive and recovery type, allowing him to continue fighting in the primordial battlefield. He was not a match for some primordial fiendish demons, but with the defensive and recovery Emperor Wa's martial techniques, he could still wear them down to death. If I had known, I would have cultivated more Emperor Wa's martial techniques. Now, Kang Xinmu was a little regretful. Anyway, a year's time was only 5 minutes in the outside world. Why couldn't he cultivate for a little longer? But it was useless to regret now. The key was that he could not use his devouring power in the primordial battlefield illusion. Otherwise, he would have a way to get rid of any primordial fiendish demon. The path ahead was more difficult for Kang Xinmu, but in the primordial battlefield illusion, Kang Xinmu persisted. He saw every primordial fiendish demon as a challenge to himself. Every primordial fiendish demon had its own weakness. As long as he could find its weakness, he could get rid of it completely with the 3 Emperor Wa's martial techniques that he had cultivated. But it would take him more time. The others who came with Kang Xinmu had a harder time in the early stage. But after they had cultivated enough Emperor Hua's martial techniques, it became easier in the primordial battlefield illusion. Ran and Moya had cultivated all kinds of Emperor Hua's martial techniques in the early stage. In the primordial battlefield illusion, they were able to deal with their opponents with ease, and the speed at which they killed their opponents was much faster. Of course, it would take them more than half a year to cultivate one Emperor Hua's martial technique in the early stage. By the time they cultivated the second batch of 5 Emperor Hua's martial techniques, it would take them more than a year to master each Emperor Hua's martial technique. The simplified version of the Supreme Emperor Hua's martial technique would take them 2 to 3 years to master one. Of course, their cultivation speed was getting faster and faster. After all, they were all Emperor Hua's martial techniques. The more they cultivated, the more they could master some of the tricks. However, it still took them about 10 years to practice 15 kinds of Emperor Hua's martial skills in total. In the outside world, it was only more than 2 hours. But they had indeed experienced 10 years on the Heavenly Stairway test, which was a big test for their spirit. In the following battles in the primordial battlefield, they had it easier than Kang Xinmu. They could use more Emperor Hua's martial techniques, which made it easier for them to deal with different situations. Therefore, they experienced bitterness before sweetness. Besides, it seemed that their performance on the Heavenly Stairway test was closely related to whether they could get Emperor Hua's inheritance. The number of Emperor Hua's martial techniques they cultivated was directly related to whether they could get Emperor Hua's inheritance. Chapter 54-59. Standing at the end of the Heavenly Stairway, Kang Xinmu was dumbfounded. Whether he could obtain Emperor Hua's inheritance was closely related to his performance along the way. However, he failed to obtain Emperor Hua's inheritance. On the last step of the Heavenly Stairway, Kang Xinmu saw a stone table placed in the middle of the steps. There was nothing else on the stone table except for the Emperor Hua's inheritance chips that he had seen before. There are so many of them. There must be more than 2,000 of them, right? Kang Xinmu recalled that the number of ancient fiendish demons that he had killed in the dreamland of the primordial battlefield seemed to match the number of ancient fiendish demons that he had killed. The reward of Emperor Hua's inheritance chips is related to the number of ancient fiendish demons that I have killed. For every ancient fiendish demon that he killed, he would be rewarded with about 5 Emperor Hua's inheritance chips. It was beyond Kang Xinmu's expectation that the final reward of the Heavenly Stairway was related to the number of ancient fiendish demons that he had killed. However, he failed to obtain Emperor Hua's inheritance precisely because he failed to cultivate all the martial arts techniques of Emperor Hua's inheritance. Kang Xinmu didn't care about it at all. After all, he had many kinds of inheritances, and Emperor Hua's inheritance was nothing special to him. The main reason was that Emperor Hua's inheritance focused on cultivating the physique, which overlapped with Kang Xinmu's devouring power. Even the ancient demonic god ancestors didn't recommend him to cultivate Emperor Hua's inheritance. In any case, Kang Xinmu had come to the end. He had obtained more than 2,400 Emperor Hua's inheritance chips, which could be considered a great fortune. If 100 Emperor Hua's inheritance chips could be exchanged for one piece of dazzling material, it would be worth hundreds of thousands of golden dragon coins. More than 2,400 Emperor Hua's inheritance chips would be worth nearly 10 million golden dragon coins. Therefore, after obtaining Emperor Hua's inheritance chips, Kang Xinmu continued to exchange for items. There were still many items left in the Emperor Hua's inheritance relic. Previously, Kang Xinmu had only exchanged 1/3 of the Emperor Hua's inheritance chips. Now, Kang Xinmu continued to exchange for 20 more dazzling materials. These materials were extremely valuable, and they were also useful to Kang Xinmu. After all, he still had the devouring dragon group in the martial dragon continent. There were dozens of members in the devouring dragon group, and if each of them needed 3 dazzling materials, the expenditure would not be small. Kang Xinmu needed to make more preparations. Then, Kang Xinmu walked towards a passage at the end of the stairs. After walking out of the passageway, Jiang Shenwu discovered that he had once again arrived in front of the stone tablet. Behind him was still the place where he had come from, deep in the inheritance of Emperor Enviwa. It seems like this stele is the core of the ruins. Kang Xinmu nodded to himself. There was no one else around. In the stairway to heaven, a day is equivalent to a single breath. In other words, the time that the others have spent on the stairway to heaven is longer than me. Kang Xinmu sat down and closed his eyes to rest. It was impossible for other cultivators to enter this place for the time being, so he decided to wait for the others to come out. Most importantly, the time flow in the stairway to heaven had been accelerated. A year's time was only 365 breaths. This ratio was too shocking. If they want to obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance, I'm afraid they will have to spend at least dozens of years inside. In other words, I also have to wait outside for half a day. Kang Xinmu was not in a hurry. Half a day passed in the blink of an eye. What he really cared about was how many of the 8 people, including himself, could obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance. It was hard to say. Time passed little by little. Kang Xinmu was digesting what he had learned in the stairway to heaven. After all, he had devoured many essences of Emperor Envoi's martial skills, so he had a deep understanding of Emperor Envoi's inheritance. Moreover, the understanding of the essences of Emperor Envoi's martial skills was actually helpful for him to cultivate other martial skills of inheritances. In the next half a day, the others finally came out of the stairway to heaven one after another. The first ones to come out were Xiao Bai and Xiao Yuhua. These 2 girls also wanted to obtain a brand new inheritance. Unfortunately, they were not compatible with Emperor Envoi's inheritance. The martial skills of Emperor Envoi's inheritance were mostly related to the body. Even Emperor Envoi's martial skills of Emperor Enviwa needed a lot of physical strength. As for Xiao Bai and Xiao Yuhua, they had been cultivating the dragon martial skills of ice and fire attributes. They were not good at fighting with their bodies. Therefore, there was a big gap between them and the others in controlling their bodies. Therefore, their speed of cultivating most of the martial skills of Emperor Envoi's inheritance was quite slow. Not only did they need to learn the strength of the martial skills of Emperor Envoi's inheritance, but they also needed to get familiar with controlling their physical strength. It took too much time. Moreover, it was not in line with their fighting style. Therefore, just like Kang Xinmu, they were lazy. Finally, they struggled to the top of the stairway to heaven and obtained some inheritance chips as rewards. Then they ended their journey. In addition to the 2 girls, Kang Xinmu was looking forward to the others. Following the 2 girls was Yi Yin. Yi Yin had always been known for his wide range of knowledge. He had studied the dragon martial skills of various attributes and was very interested in them. In the inheritance of Emperor Enviwa, he had spent a lot of time and effort to study every martial skill of Emperor Envoi's inheritance. What a pity! He failed to obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance. It seemed that there were not only some hard conditions to obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance, but also compatibility. Like the compatibility of the divine dragon's essence and blood, everyone seemed to have a compatibility with Emperor Envoi's inheritance. But Kang Xinmu could not see the compatibility. However, he could see it in the stairway to heaven. Those whose compatibility was not good could not obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance. It took Yi Yin a long time to practice most of the martial skills of Emperor Envoi's inheritance. Unfortunately, he did not practice all of them, because some martial skills of Emperor Enviwa were not compatible with his own style. Although he had trained in many dragon martial skills, the majority of them were the same as Xiao Bai and the Laughing Flower. They were all dragon martial skills of various attributes and were not fleshly body dragon martial skills. His control over his physical strength was also not that strong. In this case, it was easy to understand, and Ran, Amoya, Gu Xinyue, and Liang Xiao. Among them, someone should be able to obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance, right? Obtaining Emperor Envoi's inheritance meant that one's strength could be further improved. For the dragon martial artists who did not have a second inheritance, it was absolutely like adding wings to a tiger. Kang Xinmu hoped that one of his friends could obtain Emperor Envoi's inheritance. Finally, Liang Xiao came out. This boy had always used the eruption of dragon blood as his combat method. Harming 1,000 enemies, harming 800 of himself. Chapter 54-60. Liang Xiao's idea was simple. When he first entered Emperor Envoi's inheritance, what he wanted most was Emperor Envoi's inheritance. After all, his compatibility with the divine dragon's essence and blood made him encounter a bottleneck before he reached Supreme God. But what if he changed the inheritance? He now knew that those who practiced the Starry Sky inheritance with Kang Xinmu had not encountered a bottleneck until now. That was to say, those who were not suitable for this inheritance might be suitable for other inheritances. Therefore, he had to give Emperor Envoi's inheritance a try. With this mentality, he finally succeeded. He spent much more time than Kang Xinmu. He cultivated all the Emperor Envoi's martial skills on the celestial ladder to the heaven level. He even comprehended some martial skills of Emperor Envoi to the saint level, or even the Supreme Saint realm. The martial skills of Emperor Envoi in the saint level and Supreme Saint realm were much more destructive. It was not easy for Kang Xinmu to kill an ancient fiendish demon in the illusion of the ancient battlefield. But for Liang Xiao, it was just a piece of cake. Liang Xiao could even go deeper into the ancient battlefield to deal with and kill stronger ancient fiendish demons. This was something that Kang Xinmu could not do. Because he only devoured the essence of Emperor Envoi's martial skills of Emperor Envoi with his devouring power. If he wanted to reach the saint level or Supreme Saint realm, he must have a very high understanding of that martial skill. Kang Xinmu did not put much effort into it, mainly because he was not very interested in Emperor Envoi's inheritance. Liang Xiao not only wanted to obtain the impartation of Emperor Envoi, but also had a good fit with the impartation of Emperor Envoi. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to comprehend more than 10 martial skills of Emperor Envoi, including 3 martial skills of Emperor Envoi. This required him to expend far too much hard work. Obviously, he had spent at least 10 times more time than Jiang Xinwu, and he did not spare any effort in the cultivation of Emperor Envoi's martial skills. What is it like to get Emperor Envoi's inheritance? Yi Yin was quite interested in the inheritance of Emperor Envoi. Although he didn't get the impartation of Emperor Envoi, it didn't stop him from studying it. Hearing Yi Yin's question, Kang Xinmu, Xiao Bai, and Xiao Yuhua were also a little curious. It had been a long time since they had obtained the heritage of Sovereign Hua. Just what kind of power did it possess? Emperor Hua's legacy mostly focuses on the cultivation of the body. Liang Xiao nodded and said solemnly, "It's quite similar to my fighting style." Of course, perhaps the fiend gods of ancient times used their physical bodies as their main method of battle. I finally reached the last step of the heavenly stairway. Then, a voice told me that I was qualified to obtain the inheritance of Emperor Hua. On the last step, I obtained a ring. There are a total of 9 layers of engravings in this ring. It's a sacred item of the universe. However, it doesn't require too many cultivation resources to unseal the engravings. Meanwhile, it's not like other sacred items of the universe, where the engravings would be more powerful after unsealing the engravings. Unsealing the engravings of this ring requires the cultivation strength of Emperor Hua's inheritance. Every time one layer of engravings is unsealed, one can obtain some cultivation resources of Emperor Hua's inheritance. In other words, this ring is actually the core of Emperor Hua's inheritance. After hearing Liang Xiao's words, Kang Xinmu suddenly understood. It meant that the inheritance of Empress Envoi wouldn't be directly given to the inheritor, but would only be given a ring. Can I give this ring to others? Kang Xinmu's face changed slightly as he asked directly. It seems possible. Old Jiang, let me try it for you. Liang Shao didn't care about it. He directly threw a quaint ring to Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu reached out to catch it. After sensing it for a while, he let out a sigh of relief. He really couldn't open the ring of Emperor Hua. What was more, he could not sense any aura from the Emperor Hua's ring at all. The entire ring was like an ordinary, useless ring to him. It was nothing special. Liang Shao, you have a different feeling from me. In other words, you're the inheritor of Emperor Hua's inheritance. Kang Xinmu let out a sigh of relief and said, I thought we could give this ring to others. In that case, we'll suffer a great loss. Even if we don't cultivate it, we can sell it to others for a high price. This was Kang Xinmu's idea. He almost thought he had suffered a great loss. However, it turned out that only the inheritor of Emperor Hua's inheritance could sense the power of Emperor Hua's ring and unlock the engravings on it. In this way, Kang Xinmu had nothing to regret. If he didn't cultivate it, it was useless to take it. It was not a waste. Seeing Kang Xinmu's idea, Liang Shao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Elder brother Jiang, your idea is really strange. He took back his ring of Emperor Hua's inheritance. Then, he unlocked the first layer of engravings after a short attempt. In the heavenly stairs of test, I've cultivated Emperor Hua's inheritance. Although the power of inheritance is only equal to that of a real dragon, I've obtained the resources to upgrade the power of Emperor Hua's inheritance. After absorbing the resources from Emperor Hua's ring, I'll be able to upgrade my power. However, the relic also reminded me that if I want to upgrade my power in the future, there might be some special tests. I'll know that when the time comes. Liang Shao explained. I see. The others finally understood the situation of Emperor Hua's inheritance. Kang Xinmu was right about what happened next. Now that Liang Shao had come out and obtained Emperor Hua's inheritance, the people behind him should be more likely to obtain Emperor Hua's inheritance. After him, there were Ran Ran, Amoya, and Gu Xinyue. Ran Ran had been cultivating the Dark Dragon Filth Control art for a long time, similar to Jiang Shenwu's. He mainly used his physical body's combat strength. Therefore, she wouldn't give up Emperor Hua's inheritance. After Liang Shao, Ran Ran and Amoya appeared in front of the crowd almost at the same time. Without a doubt, both of them had obtained Emperor Hua's inheritance. Like Liang Shao, they had also obtained a ring of Emperor Hua's inheritance. With the ring, they could gradually cultivate Emperor Hua's inheritance and fight with the divine body of Emperor Hua's divine clan. The Dragon Divine Clan could fight with the body of a divine dragon. The Ancient Phoenix Clan could condense the blood essence of the Ancient Phoenix and fight with the body of a phoenix. The Talisman Water Clan could condense the shadow of the Water God, while the Thousand-Winged Snake Clan could transform into the body of a flood snake. Each inheritance had its own body of inheritance. Emperor Hua's inheritance was the divine body of Emperor Hua's divine clan. The divine body of Emperor Hua. It was a divine body with a giant human body and a snake tail. It was born with extremely strong defense ability and could exert the divine power of Emperor Hua. The divine body of Emperor Hua that Liang Shao and the others had transformed into was still too small. But when the level of their power of inheritance improved, they would naturally be able to transform into the divine warriors of Emperor Hua's divine clan in the antiquity times. Finally, only Gu Xinyue hadn't appeared in the heavenly ladder. Why hasn't Gu Xinyue come out after so long? In order to wait for Gu Xinyue, the crowd even waited for a day and a night. They couldn't help but wonder if something had happened to Gu Xinyue.